Hello and welcome to the library. My cat is already crazy behind me, so this is absolutely perfect. We are here. Hi. I hope that you are doing well today. It's supposed to be a cozy stream today, and I think I will stream a little bit, but not too much, because I just feel like I want to take a walk afterwards and maybe be cozy at home. So we'll see what we do. But first, as I think I changed the name of like the stream on Twitch, I need to check because obviously like things are only, you know, partly ready in here. But I wanted to, yes. So the title is correct. I wanted to take a look at the interview that shumplations kind of published, I think, a few days ago. I don't remember if it's yesterday or 2 days ago. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. Hi, Ellie. So it's a quite long interview, so we'll go through it like at least partly. I don't know if we might read everything. Is like everything is very interesting. I've heard that like it's a very interesting interview from other people, so I'm quite interested in looking at it. And after that we'll play like a little bit of Hytale just to have a feel for the game and see what is different from Minecraft, what is the same thing as Minecraft, and like what they want to do with Hytale in general as a game. So first let's talk about this. Oh my god, she is so noisy. This is crazy. You are certainly something, Nanoi. How will I ever be fine with you? Give me 2 seconds. Yeah, we just don't know, okay? This is what it is. I'm doing it. That's what I'm doing right now. She gets attention. She gets pet. Okay, so this is an interview between Miyamoto Itoi, who is like the director behind Mother, and you have also Seikō Itō, which is kind of like a, I don't know, a comedian, but also like a novelist that was, I can't remember what exact literary award that, well, he got, but like he's an award-winning novelist, and he's also doing rap for some reason, so a very interesting figure, Seikō Ito Seikō, because you cannot really like categorize like this person, which I think is kind of like the point of this particular interview that we'll read right now. So this was originally published in Gamer Handbook, a high-level meeting about philosophical musings on realism, creative exhaustion, the moral panic over kids and gaming, and Miyamoto's visionary notions of how gameplay will evolve in the future. Okay, so this was released in '89, so quite an old interview, right? Like we are, you know, before the whole success of like the SNES. So we were in the early big hits of like the Famicom still. Not early, but like the big games like Zelda and so on. And this is kind of like, I think, a vision of like the future. Like at the moment when the transition will happen to the next generation of consoles. Okay, so first regarding recent trends, I think that with the rapid advancement of our hardware, games are increasingly expected to deliver realism. Again, like an issue that was obviously like present back in the days. I'd like to start from that point and ask about the future possibilities for games. Well, in the beginning, there were a lot of spaceship games, so whether the movement was fast or slow didn't really matter. It felt fine regardless. But now that we have more characters, say a bear here or a weasel there, you have to differentiate how one how each one moves. Let me ask you, Miyamoto, for those kinds of minute movements, is it the programmer who handles the fine-tuning? So immediately, like a lot of spaceships games, I think what is very interesting here is that like you have trends like genres that are very popular and that are kind of like the easy solution for developers to get into when they're creating games. And, you know, in the West, and especially like in the, let's say, end of like 2000s, early 2010s, maybe like even the second half of it, you had this shooter trend, and it was kind of like the thing that you would see everywhere. Everything was like a shooter because it was the easy thing to produce. And then it kind of like shifted with like Ubisoft first and then with Nintendo to like the open world formula. So with the Ubisoft formula first, and then you have like the Breath of the Wild method, and everybody was doing like open worlds. And nowadays, I think like we have a trend that is close to like roguelikes, a little bit like Slay the Spire, Hades, those type of games. And you see them like a lot right now. At least it's like everything, like all that I have in my Steam recommendations or like those kind of like roguelikes. And there's like an obvious fatigue when it comes to it. But like what we forget is that those trends did exist back then. It's just that like maybe we weren't like alive or playing games at that point, and we don't necessarily see it by just playing the classics. So I think you have like a lot of like the platformer, the 2D platformer was like the big thing, especially with like licensed games, and everybody had like their platformer game. And what Itō is saying here is that like back in the 80s, the big genre was like shoot 'em ups. Everything was a shoot 'em up. So you had obviously like it started in the 70s with like Space Invaders, then you got like Xevious, Gradius, and all of those like different type like shoot 'em ups that became the easy genre to make games. And in 89, I think we're already like at a transitional moment for gaming, because you had like those RPGs that were starting to differentiate themselves a little bit from what the West was doing and kind of like cementing a new genre for Japanese games. And I'm talking about like Dragon Quest, I'm talking about Final Fantasy, and I'm talking about Zelda. It's important to like, I think, to remember that those games did not appear from nothing, right? There was, I think, like a very interesting article. Let me see if I can like find it. We won't read it, but I think it's like kind of like an important thing to remember. Can't remember if I retweeted this one. I may have forgotten to retweet this one, so let me try to find it again. Yes, this is this exact article here. I'm generally very like in agreement with this article. The Legend of Zelda didn't create a genre, but it helped define it, because there's a whole history of like games for the like before Zelda for the past like 10, 12, 15 years, where you had when you had like those RPG games or action games, you know, on the it's very close to like hit lead, things like that. Can I have like a screenshot of the first hit lead? So this type of like game that was like what we call bum combat, right? You would just like walk into like enemies and it would automatically attack them, but you also take some damage in return if you don't attack from the side. And this game, like Hit Lead and like the game before, the game just a bit after, they were like first tries attempts in like this action RPG genre that like Zelda really solidified afterwards in 86. And that's why at this period we are at a moment when things are changing a little bit and we have like a taste of the future. Okay, so the director specify what they want and the programmer translate those ideas into numbers. In that case, does the programmer look at the character's movement on the screen and think, oh, it doesn't feel much like a bear, or can they tell just by looking at the numbers? They can tell. However, making things look different isn't actually that much of a struggle anymore because the technology has improved so much. That is, everyone kind of already knows, yeah, this is about how a weasel should move. What's more important is whether having the weasel or bear makes for a fun game. That's what you need to figure out relatively early on. So what Miyamoto is saying here is very interesting for me because if you check like the NES and the Famicom, like that's what we're talking about right now, there's a clear difference from like the early games that were released like, you know, in 93, 83, and the games that were released like closer to the 90s. And we are on the same hardware, so it's not like there's an immense like hardware leap or graphical update. It's mostly that like developers got really good at solving the programming side of things because they have done this like for half a decade. And as Miyamoto was saying, at this point, like in the late like 80s, the problem is not necessarily programming things on the Famicom. It's most importantly designing things that are interesting. And that's what Zelda, for example, was doing, or what Mother was doing. So you mean the realism of the game system, not the visual realism? Exactly. In the medium of animation, you should show what you want people to see. So if you want someone to move fast, you just make them run fast. But in a game, you can't just make a character speed up for that one moment. There are a lot of strategies involved there. Take a human character, for example. Let's say you design them to walk in a pleasant, smooth way. This may conflict with a player's feelings. There are times when they want to run away, or times when they want to chase something. If the character keeps walking on that pleasant, smooth way, when the player is desperate to escape, the player is going to get pissed off. So, again, I think very interesting this idea of like realism. That is not like visual realism. Because we're in like a work of like fiction, of art, there are things that you should need like to change a little bit. I don't think I can like show like excerpts of like Ghibli movies right now because I think we would get like striked on YouTube. But if you check like Ghibli's animation, and especially for movements of characters or the food, you will see that the animation is always exaggerated because you don't want things to look like in real life. You want things to look lively, and it means like going a little bit overboard with like movements and curves so that like people watching from like on their screen have this impression of dynamism. And I think it's the same thing that like Miyamoto is saying here, is that you play something on your screen and you have like gaps that you fill with your imagination, and the game should be conducive to like that type of imagination. You should be able to have like actionables, levers to kind of like move your character and to like decide what like your character is doing. And I think it's what he's saying here with this idea of like, yeah, you can have like your pleasant, realistic like walk if you want, but this is not like the alpha nor the omega of like game design. Players think, hey, I'm trying my best here. You need to try hard too. There was a time when animation-heavy games, which prioritize visual smoothness over responsiveness, were becoming the mainstream, and several games with very beautiful movement came out. But as games, They were pretty much failures. Okay, so what kind of games? I think like this is the interesting question. Take karate games, for example. The characters move with this incredibly smooth fluid motion. Are they talking about certain games? He's likely thinking of games like Karateka and Prince of Persia, which pioneer smooth rotoscoped. Exactly. Now watching, we'll go back to this like a little bit later. Now watching an enemy move fluidly and slowly draw their sword is all well and good, but the player doesn't want to draw their sword slowly. The player expects realism from the enemy. But since the player themselves is already real, you have to design the game to match their feelings as closely as possible. That's why we try to make sure that the player's intent is properly reflected through their button inputs. So I think it's like a fundamental idea here that we have. This kind of like asymmetrical like representation of realism. So he's talking about like Karateka, Prince of Persia, and again, like those games do not come from nowhere. There were like evolutions on genre that already existed. And I think if we talk about like karate games per se, you had this very interesting, let me show you. You had need to find this game. So we are kind of like in the early days of like those like side combat games, and you have like Ya Kung Fu, which was for arcade, and then there was like a port on several consoles, at least on Famicom. And this is like a, can I have like a bigger thingy or not? Yeah, you won't show me. Well, this is the arcade version, right? What you can see here, and that is what made the success of like Street Fighters afterward, is that you have like 2-frame animations, which is like a problem to some extent, because it made like, on this particular game, it made like enemy movesets very hard to read. And I think like it's even worse in the Famicom version. But at the same time, I think it's pretty clear. You have a pretty clear idea of like what your character wants to do. If you want to hit, he will like strike immediately with your input. And I think that's like part of the fun of like fighting games, right? Like you want your character to feel like it hits as soon as you hit your input. And people are saying like, especially with Smash Bros, that like the characters feel as good or even better than like in their respective games. And I think it's because like Sakurai understands this idea of movesets having to be fun over like any kind of like realism and stuff. To some extent, it's what I don't like about a certain genre of like Western fighting games, starting with like, you know, Mortal Kombat and kind of like the recent entries, is that they went a bit too far on the realism, and it kind of like lost any charm I think like those games had as like fighting games, arcade games. But also I'm not like a Mortal Kombat enjoyer, so it is what it is. Like how Mario can change direction mid-air. That's actually impossible in reality, yet when you're playing, it doesn't feel weird at all. I think that's amazing, and I suppose that's what game realism really is. Yes, it's about how it feels to the player. If you think about it, Mario's jumping ability is actually ridiculous. He'd be the greatest Olympic athlete ever. If Mario only jumped as high as a human, then following real physics would be fine. And back in the Donkey Kong days, he only jumped about his own height, which didn't feel wrong. But once you're leaping 3 or 4 times your own height, you've already left reality far behind. And a very interesting like thing here is that even in recent like Mario games, or Nintendo games for that matter, as much as we are closer to some kind of like realism, you still have like those very like gamey elements. And in particular, I think, the fact that like you jump far higher than like you should normally. If you take like Breath of the Wild, Link is jumping like very, very high. For like a normal human being, can I have like a... Well, this is a glitch, so not very helpful. It will only show me... Just got home, this Minecraft thing is quite different from what I expected. Don't worry about it. I found like a very interesting interview to read first. So you can see that like, well, this is maybe not the best example, but where can we have like Link jumping, or do you hate me that much? No, nobody wants to jump, right? It's a bit crazy. But even here, you can feel that like the way Link is swinging his sword, it's way, way, way faster than what you would expect from like a one-handed like strike. I think with this amount of power, because you have like this kind of like frame impact when like the sword is hitting like the moblin, and that's part of like what makes games realism versus like real life realism. So very interesting. There's an article about like... So if Mario jumped like a normal human, you have to make the rules of the game more like the rules of a realistic novel. But once you cross a certain threshold, the player's brain sees the screen and immediately accepts that it's okay for him to do superhuman things. Exactly. They are like games are sitting in their own like hermeneutic like system, in the way that like reality doesn't matter as long as the internal rules of like the game are coherent. It's always, I think, like a question of like referential yapcraft. And here I think like, yeah, you have like this very interesting idea of different standards for different games, because rules are not the same. Physics is not the same, and like the intent of the developer is not the same. And then in the real world, if you fell from a height on an eye, you could die. But when you actually play the game, dying from a mere 2 centimeter fall wouldn't make sense. That's why lately characters just leap down from anywhere without a care. Which is very funny, because like I think games nowadays are kind of like trying to re-implement this idea of like fall damage, or at least like fall stun. And I mean, I've been playing like a lot of like Enfield lately. And this is a very interesting game, because you cannot climb, but you have like fall damage. No, you don't have fall damage. You cannot climb, and you don't have fall damage. You have like fall stun windows that you can like kind of like skip by doing like a plunge attack and kind of dashing as you hit the ground. And that's interesting, because like Enfield has this kind of like realistic quality, I think, from like the art style, and also like the movement that is kind of like on the slower side. But for players, it's okay to not have fall damage, because it fits like the intent of the universe, and like characters being like more powerful than like your average like human. And that's because the game is kind of like accepting that like it doesn't shoot for realism. It shoots for interesting elements instead. Rules are meant to be broken, so true. Since the very beginning, what makes a video game fun is that kind of unrealistic everyday life. Worlds that seem they could exist in reality but don't. ultimately a game is entirely composed of rules, and the programmer is the one who decides those rules. In that sense, the programmer is God within that world. A god can create any kind of world they want, but if that world doesn't feel convincing, no one will want to enter it. That's why an unrealistic everyday setting is about doing strange things within a set of rules that everyone accepts. Though in the end, there are still parts where people won't accept it unless it feels real, so you're forced to be realistic to some extent. Another good example here, although like it's kind of like before, like the interview was made before, is Ocarina of Time, right? If you check like the combat in Ocarina of Time and like if you remember the game, can I have working GIFs, please? Okay. Although I kind of want to see like a fight with like 2 enemies, but that might not be possible to see. That might be too annoying to find. But there's this idea like in those games where enemies will kind of like wait for their turn to attack, especially on Ocarina of Time. And the idea is that like if it was a realistic game and you were like attacked by 2-3 enemies at the same time, this would be too frustrating, which is what you will see in certain Souls games, right? Especially like Dark Souls 2, where you have multiple enemies attacking you at the same time, what we usually call like ganked. Being ganked by the enemies, which is something that players do not like. I think most players really enjoy this idea of like very tight 1 versus 1 fights because it feels like a fair challenge, and they tend to like easily criticize gauntlet fights or like 2 versus 1 fights because it feels unfair, although it would be realistic. And I think that's like what we are talking here. We are talking about like what kind of like emotions, what kind of like reactions you're trying to like create from your player. I've been going back to Silksong those past few days because I want to like finish the game. So I started a new playthrough and I'm playing the game. And if you remember the streams, there were a lot of rooms with a lot of enemies, like those gauntlet swarm rooms. And it's very hard, I think, to balance them properly because they feel very easily unfair to the player. And I think a lot of people were like, I prefer like the bosses because it feels like I just have to focus on one enemy and learn the pattern, the moveset of one enemy, and it feels like a nightly challenge versus like being attacked by like 2 million different things. And I think that was what like pushed some people away from like Silksong, even people that enjoyed like the very first game, like Hollow Knight, just Hollow Knight, because you didn't have like those swarm rooms or like boss with like rooms with 2 bosses at the same time. I think the only exception was like the Mantis Lords. And that was known to be like one of the hardest fights of the base game. So again, you have to choose like what rules you want to put, what encounters you put, and try to appeal to some extent to like what players are expecting from your game. Realism as a bare minimum with a dash of something strange. And that's basically what they did in the cartoons from that era, like Tom and Jerry. That's why things like Chaplin or Tom and Jerry have been such a vital fuel for our work. We know how much like those things have influenced like games and animation in Japan. Like Disney also was such a big inspiration for Japanese games, although like a little bit later, I think, than 89, but it is what it is. And back in the day, one gimmick was enough. So what you're saying is like pursuing realism in games doesn't equate to games simulating reality. That's exactly what I meant when I said that graphism becoming realistic was, when you think about it, a ridiculous thing. If we go down that path, it will eventually lead to caricature, a self-imposed bondage. I remember you saying that before. Rather than going for realism, you want changes like stereo sound. People aren't pinning after perfection anymore. I totally agree. It's about how weird you can get. Realistic sounds are just boring, you know. On the PC Engine CD-ROM, the games use actual human voices, but it's really lame. It ruins the immersion. You lose the ability to project yourself into the character because you're forced to hear this other distinct voice. I think like here Itoi has like a very like, you know, clear-cut opinion on the subject. I don't necessarily agree with him. I think like you had interesting things like maybe not like on this era because we did not have like many, you know, FMV games, but I don't think like voices are problematic because like you hear someone else and like it's weird. I think voices, realistic voices, started to become problematic when it was the highlight of games instead of like the actual content, gameplay content of the game. It was like an easy expedient that was like a little bit weird when the game did not propose anything else. Imagine if the flying man's lines in Mother were read by a human voice. Wouldn't that be awful? Again, I think it's a question of like intent. You can make games that are working around like those like realistic sounds and stuff. Everyone is already reading those lines in their own heads, giving him, in this case like the flying man, giving him their version of a frail, delicate voice. Which is very interesting here because like you have like this trend nowadays of people wanting like more and more like dubs in their games. Like especially when we see like gacha games, you have like a lot of people complaining that like certain stories are not like dubbed, only the main story, the character story are. And I personally don't see the problem. Like I don't think it's that problematic as long as like, because you can imagine the voice. Like if you are used to like the voice of a character, then you can imagine it in your head. And I like the space that is given to imagination in general. And hi, Sigrid. So I kind of agree with Itō to some extent here. In my head, I don't picture most games' characters Japanese. The protagonist always has blue eyes, right? Also because like it's a very Japanese thing to do, to be like culturally agnostic. Did you envision the colors for Mother like that from the start? No, there were a proposal from a designer. I've got this option and that option. What do you think? I personally think this one is the best. That's generally how I work. I ask the person doing a job. On the surface, it may look like I'm trying to be even-handed or something, but I definitely play favorites. But the thing is, if the person actually doing the work says that's the one, I can usually get behind it. You see someone on the outside looking in might have all kinds of different opinions. Maybe they dislike muted colors, who knows, but when somebody actually involved in the project, that is the designer himself, says that they want to do something with a certain level of passion, there's always a reason for it, a deep fundamental reason, just like rolling over in your sleep. I don't know what he's talking about. Can you? I have zero inner monologue. If I read something, I just process the words. There's no, what the heck? Am I the only one? I know that like I have at least a very vivid imagination. Like, I don't know if it's hyperphantasia, but I kind of like, what the heck? Like, if you play a game and the dialogue is not dubbed, but like you know the voice of this character because it's dubbed everywhere else in the game, you don't hear the voice in your head of this character. I'm stunned. I'm in shambles right now. I just hear the inner voice, but I don't process the words. That's not a good thing, Ellie. That's crazy. Also, we'll never play the game at this point. Like, even a game that has like that Undertale beep 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 on text feels more vivid than plain text box, because otherwise there's just nothing. What the? like. I mean, I do agree that like the loss of like beep 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 to some extent was like a mistake. But oh, wow. Maybe I'm the weird one here. I've been making the point lately that rolling over in your sleep isn't a renovation, there's a real fundamental reason behind it. Really? Take the way I'm sitting right now, even this pose is kind of rolling over in your sleep. What is he talking about? Yeah, the muted color choice of Mother helped distinguish it from the sea of other RPGs. It became a visual identity of the series. It'd be nice to know what the designer's reasons was that Itō alludes to. Yeah, I think although you have like, it's less the case, I think, in Mother 3, but definitely like the muted colors kind of like help grounding like the story in like America, in my opinion. I just hear a high note every time this. I think everyone is different. It just feels dismissive from the interview. Oh, definitely. I think like this particular thing like is completely like the personal opinion of like those people. I think like it's easy to agree with like the very broad statements of games realism, but I think at the end of the day, it's a case-by-case basis. People that have a vivid imagination deserve to have some space for that space, but just don't dismiss people that feel suddenly a void when the text goes from voice to unvoice. Yeah, space for that imagination, whatever. I think like, as you said, like the kind of like just like sound effects when like the text is like rolling on your screen is kind of like a good it has a good like, it's a good middle ground because like it gives some personality to the characters, the text, because you can like mix and match like sound effects, but at the same time it's not dubbed, so as like the player you can still imagine things. And this like era of like RPG that like use like sound effects like as a very like vivid communicative like device, I think that was like such a good idea, and it's a bit sad that like certain games have like forgotten about that to some extent. Like playing Silksong again, like I found like the little bits of like pseudo, you know, insect dialogues sounds very interesting because they kind of like conjure back this idea of like only giving, it's like you're giving personality notes to the player, but it's a bit like indications like on a play that you would read, and you let the player fill like the gaps with like the rest of like the voices that they can hear or whatever. Okay. I'm sitting like this because my body has an actual necessity to be in this posture. The fact that I'm being watched by others and my own internal necessity. I believe that the future of creative work lies in how much we can tap into and breathe life into that kind of raw instinct. If you tell someone no, do it this way about something they love, it's like forcing them to roll over against their will. They'll get sick, and it's not enjoyable for the viewer either, you know? I want to apply this idea to games, but I just don't know how. Very interesting, like, to read this interview, like, you know, nowadays, where we know that, like, games have to make, like, so much compromise, like, especially, like, AAA games, and you can feel that, like, developers, writers, they had like so many interesting ideas, but executives were like, you need to go for like the safest idea that will not like anger, you know, the right-wing gamers. So a very foreboding like statement. As we become able to use more colors, it's boring if every image looked the same, if it's just realistic art. That's why we are seeing things finished with an illustrative touch, where the whole game has a specific feel. Whether it's music or art, a game with a distinct worldview is just more fun. when you go that route, the individual creator's touch become everything. The right-wing gamers will always be angry though. So true, she is so true, +2 Sigrid. So kind of like an example on this, like for me, one of the most beautiful game on the SNES. It's like those kind of like, you can see here that like, oh my god, can I have like big pictures? You know that we're on the SNES. You can see more colors. It's obvious that like it's 16-bit, but at the same time, even like if like you had this image that like everybody knows. Wait. Like everybody knows of this particular illustration, right? It was the illustration of the channel for a while. You can see how colors are popping, and this is something that you will find in here again. It's grounded. I think the colors are grounded, but you still have like those very specific patches of like brighter colors that give the identity to Secret of Mana. I think Secret of Mana is a very like bright game, and in general it will like distinguish itself from like Chrono Trigger, who had like this more muted I'm losing it. More muted colors, more like nostalgic like palette in general. You can still see like a lot of very bright colors, but I think it's like less poppy to some extent. She's not seeing the big picture. I can't. I cannot see the big picture. Right-wing gamers left beef pizza. What is she talking about? Non-wing gamers left all wings pizza. A mystery lentil stew. Why is it a mystery? Okay. But even in the world of graphic design, there's a real shortage of truly great illustrators. If the video game industry starts getting greedy for that kind of talent too, I don't know what will happen. There are still nowhere near enough people working on the information industry. With Gygas in Mother, I feel like we could have refined him so much more, but it's no, okay. For that final form, I actually given instruction for it to be like Buto, that dance of darkness, something incredibly frail. Like if they were right there in front of you, you feel like they'd collapse if you barely touch them. Eerie and beautiful, but that's easier said than done, right? I wanted to depict the terror of the weak. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, I do agree. Like, I think it was pretty clear that they wanted to go for this, like in the base game. So if you don't know Buto means dance, literally, which is kind of like sometimes translated in English into Dance of Darkness, because it was kind of like a reaction to like the new type of like modern dancing that you had, and Buto was like a sort of like return to like old historical traditions with movements that were meant to feel like unnatural, and this is like a very like typical thing that you can see like in Buto. This is, you know, you watch Buto, it's kind of like touching on like a sort of like forbidden side of humanity. Bread. It's a mystery because I just put in whatever I had left in the fridge, but it's a mystery for the people eating it, not for you, right? Now, plenty of cases where being a bit crude is actually a plus. Take English, for example. We Japanese have a real complex about it, right? We can't actually understand what they are saying in the movie, so we read the subtitles and just imagine the rest. In a way, we're lucky. The hero becomes even more heroic in our minds. okay, you know what? Like, we are back into the translation thing +2. I don't know how many of you have played like games in languages that like you don't know. But I used to play like Japanese games before like I was learning Japanese. And it's true that like you will just pick up a few elements, but in some ways it still works. It's a different experience of like a different way of experiencing the game, but I don't think it's worthless. You will create your own adventure, and it feels like kind of like touching back on like your childhood when you were playing games without being able to read. Like I remember that like I was like playing some games when I was like young, for example Link's Awakening, but I did not understand like everything that like Link's Awakening was doing. But it was still like conveying something to me, and I think the lack of understandable dialogue was like a big part of it. I used to play English games before I understood English, and like what kind of like opinion do you have like on those games, on this kind of like experience? Like nowadays I think it's a bit hard to go back into this because we're adult and we have less time maybe, but like to some extent, do you miss that or not? This is the way of the Eurogamer +2. Because you don't understand the words, that sense of mystique stays intact. Rap music is the perfect example for that. Isn't it? Yeah. I've got this strange attraction to bluegrass music. Even in bluegrass, there's a lot of songs are super tragic, like about losing your job or your wife leaving you, and we just laugh and sing along to them. Exactly, there's like a distance between you and the artwork. Speaking of realism, I think like Ito's novel No Life King also explored a theme of another kind of reality in relation to our current reality. It makes me wonder if there isn't a new kind of reality belonging to this new generation. We'll not say that like on this channel. Having to ask my mom about what to do in Pokemon sure was a thing, but that created like a special bond, right? For someone like me, the way I'm built, my age and life experiences prevent me from reaching that other reality. It just doesn't exist for me anymore. To be perfectly blunt, I have no hope of ever reaching it. Yet here I am, starting from that place of disconnect and making games because I find them interesting. I think that difference, that gap, is quite apparent in Mother. You're right on the edge yourself, Ito-kun. You're trying to understand it, but in truth, you're fundamentally different from the new generation. It really is about how we are built, isn't it? The kids who are obsessed with games today, they're as human as we are, but society seems determined to treat them like they're something else entirely. But is there such a thing, this other reality? When you're playing a game, there's no way you aren't conscious of the fact that you're the one playing it. The idea that you could somehow leap beyond the fact that it's a game, that's just impossible. Very interesting. And I think it's like always the annoying thing to me when people are talking about like immersion. Oh, I want my games to be realistic because I want to be fully immersed in it to the point I forget that it's a game. But that's not what immersion is. I mean, you can be like semi-immersed in a universe, and that's good enough because the goal, I think, is to open a window more than pushing you in another room. I remember playing Final Fantasy V like a roguelike game because I didn't understand you could permanently save in the overworld. This is absolutely insane though. This was of course explained if you couldn't understand English. Playing RuneScape only by mechanical feedback but without knowing what's going on. Exactly, and I think it's like games should be able to convey that like without dialogue. And people kind of like forget that about Nintendo games, but they're really, really good at that. A lot of like people that, you know, are young adults or adults nowadays that grew up like as like heavy gamers will always be like, oh, those games are so easy, like there's no friction and stuff. But the thing is, if you take like Nintendo games and the way they're conveying information through feedback, through like pictures or visual representations instead of like text, it helps getting like young people, and by that I mean like children that do not know how to read, into those games. And I feel like nowadays, in the ecosystem of like gaming on the internet, people kind of like forget that like, I think like every young adult that I know hates children to a point they like forget that children actually exist and that they can play games and stuff. And it's like, when was the last time you have seen like dedicated AA games for children? Really a game that you would say, okay, I have a child and you will play that game at like 3, 4, 5 years old and I will be super happy to play with you. And that's like kind of like the thing that we have underlined here, is that we need to communicate things to kids and not like get sucked into this idea that, again, society like tells us every day that like kids are not welcome in public. They should not be seen. Like, do I enjoy like seeing the antics of like high schoolers or middle schoolers when I go out? Not really, but at the same time, like we were also like this at their age and we were playing things and we were like, we had like media that was also made for us. So it is what it is. I swear to God, having full mithril in Barbarian Village was a flex back in 3rd grade. It is what it is. We should develop a game in a made-up language nobody can understand. Okay, but like, it's different from what Siggy is saying. Is that a conlang for the library? Or are we making a game written by Ellie and nobody would understand anything, Ellie included? What's the library word order? I think we should have like the verb first. A verb, object, subject. If we're talking about immersive tricks, movies are actually far more sophisticated at doing that. Kind of like a weird thing to say. I would say that like movies where it's not sophisticated in my opinion. I don't know. It's so bizarre. Society buys into this image of kids getting sucked into the tube and people actually believe that. We call the games we make a simulated experience, and while we know gamers get immersed in that simulation, they're still aware it's a game. To say they confuse it with reality is incredibly condescending, +2. It's not that it never happens, like, you can have like people that have trouble like dissociating reality from like what they do in fiction in a game or whatever. But most of the time, everybody knows that like you're in front of your screen and that like when you look up, you see your window with people outside. A couple of days ago, I overheard middle school students talk about their iron farm in Minecraft, and I remember that, yeah, I used to be a kid too. Exactly, you have like those shared experience, maybe not necessarily, exactly, or this is, I played Minecraft and you 10 years later, you're playing Minecraft. But there are like relatable experiences you can share with like young people nowadays. Minecraft released while I was in uni. Minecraft released when I was in middle school. Minecraft was released after I played it. Thank you, Ellie, for releasing Minecraft. I just meant I had the exact experience with other games. Yeah, I think it's like the case with MMOs, right? Or like those games that were here for like 10+ years. I think like Again, WoW is a good example as well, I think. RuneScape too, it's like, oh, I played this game when I was like a kid, and nowadays you can still play that game and you have like new players coming in and so on. And it's kind of like important to remember that, like, yeah, we came from those places back then. Exactly, if they felt like that, they wouldn't find bugs. They're looking for bugs precisely because it's again +2, +2, +2. It's about a group of elementary school students who begin to believe that their own reality is part of a mysterious RPG video game called Life King. Okay, so they were fighting their teachers. Nowadays I can still play the game and I'm still a kid. You know what? That's kind of like commendable, to still be a kid nowadays. What made No Life King interesting was that it didn't underestimate kids. Adults often portray children as very innocent, easily fooled, thinking pure thoughts. But that's not how it is. Kids know some pretty bad stuff too, and they have their own strategies to deal with it. You can't just dismiss that. And kind of the reverse, like, you know, kids are also like intelligent like beings that are, or at least rational beings that can make decisions and stuff. They just don't have like the same breadth of experience that we have. Well, you kid +2. I'm like Ash, been 12 for 25 years. It is what it is. That's why they are little adults. Adults who aren't quite tall enough, not quite smart enough, but they manage to do quite a lot despite their shortcomings. I wouldn't call them like little adults, but I would just like stop using kids as like a dismissing word. But okay, like this is wild. But so-called arcade games have a vibe similar to gay magazines. I just cropped this. And we'll wrap up this interview. It is a closed world, a world outsiders don't understand, where like-minded people gather as their circle shrinks, like narrowing concentric circles. So I think it's important what I did this time with Martha went in a different direction. Oh, you mean the so-called otaku world? Let's continue to read. I'm not sure where they want to go. Speaking of that mindset, this is a slightly different topic. But take game mechanics, for example. Let's say you have an item in the game that makes you so strong it practically breaks the game. When you look at game magazines, they talk about those items as if it's some bargain for the player. They think it's a good thing, in other words. They don't stop to think, if you put something like this in, it's not even a game anymore. The idea of anything that gives you an advantage must be good. It's starting to feel a bit warped to me. That's because their goal isn't to inhabit the character and enjoy the experience, it's just to beat the game. So true. Similar to game magazines. Very, very interesting. I'm not actively listening and I have no context. Thank you, Ellie, for your participation on this discussion. I think it's very interesting. I'm not saying that like you shouldn't like put strong items and stuff, because I think it's also part of like the reward as the player, you know, you have like surmounted like some difficulties and stuff, and you get some kind of like reward to some extent. That is kind of like helping your experience because it fits narratively. Let's talk about like RPGs where you get like a better weapon or better armor after a dungeon. Or it shifts your experience considerably after you experience it the first time. And for me, like the key example would be like survival horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or whatsoever, where you get like very powerful weapon after finishing the game. So your subsequent playthrough is kind of like a walk in the park because you can just one-shot every enemies, right? And I think it's like putting items, it will shift the experience in a very particular way that might have been thought of by the developer or not. But I do agree to some extent with this idea of like game magazines that were really, really stuck on this idea of like beating games. And not necessarily like the adventure that was the human adventure that is playing those games. If you know, for example, like Tower of Druaga, which is like one of the seminal RPG games. So to explain what it is, basically, so you're in a sort of labyrinth and you need to like get the keys. The problem is that like there are secret worlds and stuff and kind of like special secret requirements that are very cryptic that you need to do in the labyrinth to get to the next stage. And back then it was like an arcade game and there was no, you know, walkthrough or guide or whatsoever. So people in Japan used to like leave notes in like notebooks that would sit in like the arcade room, and people will collaborate to make like guides like this. And this was a very particular experience where you would leave like the game as an experience greater than the game itself to some extent. And whenever you have like people playing like Tower of Druaga nowadays, it's so easy for us modern gamers to just use guides, right? Like you want to play a historically important games, but you don't have like 30 hours in front of you like to try again and again and again and again this game. So you use a guide, and people are always like, I can see like how it's interesting, but like I didn't get it because I was using a guide and so on. And it's like, but that was not the point of the game. The point of the game back then was like this experience that was meant to be like a heavy friction and collaborative experience that is really hard to emulate nowadays because you don't have like those arcade environment to do that anymore. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use guides because they are a completely valid way to play games. But sometimes some games, it's true that you can feel that they are made for you to discover them like on your own first. Playing a good video game makes me feel quite gay. Or at least, if you feel gay playing a game, then it must mean that like this game is good. Saying gay in a sentence is like a sleeper agent wake-up comment +2. I had that beating the game mindset, hence I played chess like a farming simulator +2. I played chess like an idle game. But okay, real talk. That's why, okay, mahjong discourse. That's why like I don't necessarily like Richi Mahjong, because it kind of like in the essence of the game, you need to play defensively. You are like invited, you don't have to, but like you're invited to count. You're invited of like playing like carefully around what other players are doing, which is very different from like Chinese style mahjong. And I personally prefer the Chinese style because for me, this game is not like to win. It's just like to have like something to do with your hands while you're chatting with people. And I think it's kind of like, I know that Sigrid say that like as a jest, but I think there's like something about like, you know, playing Go, chess, shogi, mahjong, but like as a communal activity to spend time with people instead of like beating the game, right? Playing the game means you need to understand the game +2. I leave and we're talking about mahjong, don't worry about it. I finished it in 3 days and all that. Boasting about speed in games is a sickness, really. Okay, I think Itoi is kind of like he's kind of a crazy individual. I mean, it's an old interview, right? So like he had like his own idea about games and stuff, and like speedruns weren't as popular as they are right now, but even like speedrun is a very different thing than just finishing a game fast in a casual manner because you want to say that you finished it. I think like speedrun, the moment you start thinking about like I'm speedrunning the game, you kind of like enter another experience where like roles are changing again, and it creates like a new type of experience that has its own worth. Saying mahjong in a sentence is like a Rani wake-up comment +2. I guess so, but I don't want to encourage people to brag about that kind of thing. That's a lonely person, I think. There's something empty about it. Posting about what level you were when you finished, it makes the game sound like a driving school course. You only brag about speed when you are talking about a chore you hated. Some people just pick run every time. Or they warp their way through the whole game to rush to the ending. You have to wonder, why do they even bought it in the first place? Do you want to try out to do useless magic too? Very interesting, this idea because I think, retro game enjoyers, I think if you have been deep into retro gaming and stuff, you obviously know how to finish Mario in a record time. You know the warp rooms, you can go to world 8 in basically 5 minutes, right? But I think it's what they are saying, it's it's not that you shouldn't use those things, is that there serves very specific purposes that sometimes people misunderstand. And you should still try to enjoy the rest of the game, right? There are so many things you can do. And I think it's very real, in a world where games are so expensive nowadays. It's finding some kind of organic replayability in the game to make it worth it. So you play the game once and twice and 3 times and it still has value to you, which I guess is why the roguelike genre is such a big thing nowadays. But I find it quite interesting, finding meaning by yourself through mechanics instead of being shoved an adventure that is incompressibly 50 hours long. What are they talking in the notes? Novelty item in Mother, ruler, protector, and friendship. Yeah. It's buying a book to just read it afterwards. Okay, they are a bit crazy though, they are a bit insane. What direction should video games take to make us happy? What kind of games are selling well right now? What was selling well at that time? You had still a lot of arcade port. I think also at that time categories were less cemented than a few years after. So this was still a very open field in my opinion. Yes, every genre has its own dedicated following, I do agree. All else being equal in terms of fun, the games that sell are usually the grand large-scale RPGs with sprawling stories and worlds, games that take a long time to play through, but personally I prefer games you can finish quickly. I think they have a much better chance of reaching a wider audience. Everyone is so focused on long play games because they think that's what sells, but then something like Tetris comes along and just blows everyone away. I heard from Famicom Tunchin that no game has sold 200,000 copies this year. Very interesting again, because it's the same thing we had. We are talking about RPGs nowadays that are if you want to play Persona 5 Royal, it's 150 hours. Who has the time for this? It's impossible. And I think games that are working nowadays are kind of those short bite games that you can come again and again and again, but you can also just play on your break or whatever, and it's fine. And people always surprised of whoa, why are you playing gacha games? The answer is pretty simple. Those games are first of all free to play. They are predatorial, but they are free to play. And they are made for a demographics of people that are working, studying, and that do not have a lot of time on their hand. So you can do a quest in 40 minutes. You can play a few dungeons, use your energy or whatever, and it will take 10 minutes of your day. And most gamers are actually like this. Like, who wants to play like an RPG that takes, you know, half a year to finish? Transitional period, the whole industry is just letting out alongside the frustration. We have those established genres, adventure, sports, shooting, and they form the core foundations. But there are this huge collective desire right now for one more new genre to breathe life back into the room. What was the game in like the 80s? I mean, the 80s was kind of like the golden age for RPGs though. It's the moment when like RPGs were really like hitting their stride in terms of like storytelling and stuff. So I don't know what was a new genre per se. Contemporary example of RPG mechanics finding their way into action games would be Fantasy Zone and Forgotten World, or action RPG hybrids like Dungeon Explorers. Yes, Fantasy Zone, that is like a shoot 'em up, but you have like those like slight RPG mechanics with levels and stuff. You had the same thing with Gradius to some extent, but at the same time, gacha feel like they demand a permanent daily investment of time that ends up being more tiring than a long game. I finished neither of the two. I think it's because like, I do agree with you, first of all. But most people do not play gacha, like those games, like every day, right? I don't think most people are consistent in their daily engagement with the games. They might just, you know, do the main story and then you just drop the game until next patch. So, and you'll pick the game back in like a month and a half. And because like what I've seen is that like in those gacha games, most of your time that you will spend daily after you finish the main story is spent on getting better relics, right? Upgrading characters, getting ready for endgame. Because the main game is never a problem. You can like finish that like with whatever characters you have. But you need to grind like a lot if you want to be ready for endgame. And most people don't care about that. Most people do not have like any notion of like what endgame is like. Be it in Genshin, Star Rail, whatever big gacha game, they just do not care about this. Uma Musume is the same thing. Like, whoa, yes, you can like go super deep with like your stats building, but at the same time, like most players, I think, are just pulling for the characters they like and doing their stories, and that's all. And I guess like gacha games are doing this two-pronged approach of like trying to please like this very casual crowd that do not care about anything else than the story, and like trying to gain the attention, especially of like players that are, you know, playing like every day. They have fallen into like the meta trap of wanting to clear endgame like at 100% every time, and that's how you get like somewhere else. Dailies are exhausting and always make me burn out on the game. Taking breaks and not feeling punished is amazing. I think it's very interesting because I was talking also to some people that were like, I grew up with like games like World of Warcraft, right? And this had become like a habit since I was young. And actually having like dailies was kind of like something to help focus on this game. So there's like this, you know, weird balance that like those gacha games are trying to find, I think, between like punishment and trying also to keep your attention in like a positive way to some extent. There's so many games I have an urge to play, but then I realize I don't want to play the game. I just like the idea of playing it. I think it's most people are like that nowadays, especially with like streamers becoming like so important, content creators, because you can now experience, like if you were young and in the early 2000s, or 90s, what do you do if you want to play a game? You just play it, right? You don't have a choice if you want to know what the game is about and stuff. You might have like some, you know, articles in magazines and stuff, maybe the occasional, especially like in the early 2000s, like shows, TV shows that are showcasing games, but you didn't have like let's plays and stuff yet. But nowadays it's so easy to get like knowledge about games without playing them ever. I don't super enjoy old WoW dailies, but at least it was like a long task to complete something. It was a long investment, but had an end date. No, old dailies are a permanent task. I do agree. It's like they are trying obviously to instill like a routine into you to like obviously have you come like every day to do it. And I think some of them are working like very well. I think like Zenless has a very smooth daily feel, because it feels like a not second hand, but like a side game, and you can finish your dailies in like less than 1 minute. But like just hooking you for 1 minute is their like door to kind of like push you to play the game more. The problem is wanting to watch someone play an old game in a specific way, but there's no content on the internet in your language. Do you have like an example of that? Perchance, so we can like have a concrete example to discuss. It's the idea that if you stick two systems together, you get an even more amazing system, right? Sometimes that works, but I don't want that for every genre. Yeah. It's like how rhythmic gymnastics only exists because it had traditional gymnastics as a foundation. It's that kind of relationship. Very good example. Are developers really out of ideas? I mean, the technology leap was like also something that like helped, I think, a little bit developers to get their hand on something new. We talked about like the Famicom being like, there was a lot of difficulties in the early years, but then those difficulties are solved and you don't have like this feeling of being restricted by your system anymore. The SNES comes, you do a game that is kind of like doing everything that you wanted to do on your previous console, and the example was especially like for Nintendo games, you had like Zelda free. And then it's like, okay, what are we doing? Are we stuck like with, you know, the NES? And the answer is like kind of yes, but being stuck helps you like be creative. The problem is that if dailies are 1 minute, I get used to playing 1 minute of the game. Yeah, I see what you mean. I have an urge to play Tibia, but when I play it, I just burn out after a few days of being super into the game. I think that's a problem. Like, in a way, we have normalized like being like going all in into games, when I don't think it's like something that works very well. To some extent, the gacha thingy of like, oh, you have a patch and like events are releasing like slowly, and it kind of like forces you to pace yourself. Like, okay, for example, like the Genshin patch right now is Mondstadt. It opened with like Varka stories. You had like basically 5 days to do it, and they're now sending like the Mondstadt event. And I think like pacing yourself, it's like, oh, it's new. I'm doing something new, but at the same time, like I don't go all in. I'm taking my time because I want to do other things. It helps pace you yourself. But it's hard to do so when the game is not communicating you like this idea that you shouldn't like play, 8 hours in a row. A good fix that I don't really care about, because not wanting to play a gacha is a good thing, would be that doing other tasks complete your dailies. Like if you had side quests to do, you would get all your dailies done. Once you're out of side content, then you can replace them with dailies. Okay, but that's literally what like Genshin was doing, right? Because Genshin back in the days, you had to do your dailies. That was like super annoying. I can't even imagine how I was able to do my dailies in Genshin. Every day, you had to do you had 4 quests that you needed to. It's not like, oh, you have like Enfield. It's like one very short quest that you need to do. You literally had to do like 4 different quests. And they decided at some point, I think like 2 years ago, that like it was too insane. So now in Genshin, if you finish a quest, it will like do your dailies. If you open like chests or do exploration in the overworld, it will also count as your dailies. And if you go overboard, for example, you collect like more chests needed than for the amount of your dailies, it goes into like a reserve of energy that can be used to kind of like buy your dailies by just spending energy. So like, for example, like right now, I have like enough reserve to solve dailies for like 2 weeks. If I don't really want to play the game, I can just like craft energy, well, you know, Luna thingy, or I can just like do one dungeon and it will like clear my daily requirements for the day. So Genshin is doing better in that way, but as you say, you're still stuck in doing your dailies anyway. So that's why, like, if you are not like a gacha player, don't get into gacha. Like I've been playing Genshin since release. I'm too deep into it, so it is what it is. I'm a lost cause. There's a huge amount of content on YouTube, Twitch, in Portugal, and well, Portuguese or Polish, but not in English. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the problem to some extent of like, you know, not knowing all languages. I would say that Enfield had the worst dailies I've seen recently. Probably half of it is not needed, but you do know part of gacha is that they don't ever communicate you what will be important. Are you talking about like the dailies in the ship? Like visiting like other people's ship? I think it's very weird because they are kind of like expecting you to... I've seen a lot of complaints of Enfield about like the credits and how like the rewards for them were very like limited. And it's like, it's weird because there's no good solution. It's meant to be like an optional social thing that you can like completely ignore. But because it's still giving like even the smallest amount of like premium currency, people will force to do it, and then they will complain that like it's not enough for the amount of time they're spending doing like those social things when it was meant to be optional in the start. So they kind of like dug their own grave in here, I think, by trying to imitate what they were doing in like original Arknights. Yeah, there are a lot of things that you need to do. To be fair, I think that like it has a rough onboarding, Enfield. I do like Enfield quite a lot, to be fair, but it's rough, which is always the case for gacha game either way, because like you're like scrapping for resources like a lot. I've been playing the game like every day since release, and I think like right now, after almost like a month and a half, I'm starting to get comfortable with like my state of resources, and I know that I can skip like certain things. Because recycling stations, they are not useful anymore. Trade, I still do it a little bit, but like not too much. Ship, I do it because like I feel like I have the time. It's not too time consuming, but I could easily skip that. Energy spending is like the big thing, and deliveries, you're basically just sending like the deliveries to other people to do. But the game is not communicating, as you say. The game is not communicating that like it's what you should do, because obviously that's not in their interest to communicate that as a gacha game. But I feel like, yeah, because of the breadth of systems that they have, like you have the factory and you have like the traditional like RPG, action RPG side, there's a lot of things you can do. Like right now, I'm very comfortable with my teams. I'm very close to like trimming the medals in like the world bosses by killing them like under 2 minutes at max difficulty. And it feels like, yes, I can take it like easy because like I'm basically in a situation where I have a workable teams. I have 2 workable teams, and I can just like slowly add characters every time, and it doesn't require that a lot of work. But if you are not in that state yet, and there's no way you can be in that state if you don't play every day, yeah, the game will punish you. And then when they say you would be able to collect things remotely after certain progression weeks ago, but it is not even coming in next patch. Oh, it's not coming in next patch? Oh, yeah, because in the dev note it was like, oh, we are working on that, right? And people being, do you think it will be? No, I know that like cheaper recycling stations, at least that's 100% sure that like next patch they are fixing it. I think they said that like if you were at a high level of upgrades of your ship or like recycling stations, then you can like collect everything remotely. Also, if you do the deliveries for the ticket thingies, you already go through the recycling, and if you go through recycling, you can already loot the mats, and then you can do all the recycling, and then I feel forced to play like 40-minute daily. It's on the list of things they're still working on. Okay. Then I misread it. Yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, it's a gacha game, right? Like, you should not play gacha games in general. Like, if you are not... like, those are dark patterns. There's no way, like, I'm not here to defend, like, Enfield. Like, I really like Enfield, but, like, I'm not here to defend the game. It's a gacha game. Who cares? If it dies, I will be sad, but I'm not... I will never, like, push people to play Arc Knight. But definitely, there were things that were interesting. I think, like, I enjoyed the factory aspect. I think it was fun. I liked the traversal aspect with the idea of, like, setting up the world for you to be, like, more efficient. Like, the more you progress, the more you set up things, putting, like, skylines and stuff. Not skylines, but, like, whatever. But yeah, it's called skylines in the game, right? But it requires an amount of effort that like should not necessarily be asked of players. I like and feel I would like to enjoy it, and I will end up missing the good because the patterns kind of lead me to bad patterns. So the only sane thing to cut it out, is to cut it out. But like, what do you like about it? Because it's the thing, like, right, if you don't care about endgame, you shouldn't care about like progression on those like daily things, right? I think the obviously there's the biggest dark pattern is wanting to pull characters, meaning that you need to play the game a lot. But if you don't care about pulling characters, which is a completely valid way of playing, you could just enjoy the game just by like going through main story and just building your thing slowly, no? in any way, like it's predatory, and like, you know, I'm not saying that like you won't feel like any pressure and stuff, but let me see what you sent me. Oh yeah, okay. It was okay. It was on the last section. The moment I return to main story, I will be pulled into the daily loop because it's how my brain works. Yeah. I think that's the problem, right? Is that those games are like so inherently like predatorial that like, as you said, like the easiest thing to do is just to cut them out. Okay, so by the way, I've not, because of like Enfield, we'll never play, by the way, we'll never play Hytale, which is like insane. Maybe we should like at least, because I don't want to make like another thumbnail on YouTube. So I've not gone back into like Where Winds Meet again. So there wasn't, from what I've seen, like a lot of daily things, right? But at the same time, I did not unlock kind of like the end game thingies, right? So what for you is the thing that is keeping you coming into like Where Winds Meet, for example? We were playing games today. I was talking to May yesterday, and I was like, people in my chat, they don't want me to play games. They want me to yap. And that's why like I'm trying to cut games out of the rotation. I've applied to like a collective of YouTubers. We'll see if like it works or not. But it's kind of like, it's a science communication collective. And if I go into that, then we'll see way less games on this channel, because I want to talk about like, you know, other topics and science and stuff, and we'll just be yapping forever. It's the MMO part. And I'm in a guild, so we do activities. Okay, so like, what is like bringing you here is the fact that you're playing with other players, right? So you're creating your own loop of engagement with I see. To be fair, I completely agree with the fact that like, of course it doesn't work. I forget that the goal again is like to make you fall into habits. But it would be so much more healthier if like those games were strictly on a weekly basis and not on a daily basis. Like you can log in every day if you want, I think, because you get like energy always. But I think you should have like objectives that are tied to, well, weekly things. Like for example, what you would do, remove daily requirements, daily rewards, but you still have like a cap of energy that is like filling like every 24 hours. But kind of like in Star Rail or Zenless, the overcap energy is going like into like reserve that is like filling at like a quarter of the rate, of the base rate. And then like you only have like weekly objectives where it's like, oh, you need to spend like this amount of energy per week, right? So you can kind of like log in once per week or twice per week and kind of like shoot everything at once by using like this overcapped energy that went into the reserve, even if like you're technically wasting like 3/4 of it due to like it's like lower filling rate. But obviously that's not what I want to do, right? I would not even punish not daily login. Exactly, you should not be forced to log daily. Like I think because, okay, well, your energy is overcapping, but like who cares about that? Because it's not premium currency, right? Like energy is literally used for like building characters, and like farming relics or whatever. Like the reasoning, as far as I know, is that if you log in weekly, you have a higher chance of missing a week and quitting, I guess. I think it's the case. And also, like, you know, if you're in a daily routine, it's way, way, way harder to break a daily routine than like a weekly routine. Like, I think like you being like ingrained of like doing things like every day at like the same hour, I think it's just like such a powerful thing, you know, that in for everything, right? You want to learn something, get into a daily routine. You want to work out, get into a daily routine or weekly routine of working out, going like 3-4 times per week. It's just that strong. As long as you check the store once a week and the banners, they are getting the money out of you. Daily routine leads to faster burnout. For you, you mean? Yeah. I think like obviously there are different like there are different like behaviors, I guess, and ways of like dealing with those routines and habits. So it is what it is. Hello, Jack Amnesia on YouTube. Hello, sorry, we're not playing exactly the game right now. We are yapping about like game design because we were like reading an interview between Miyamoto, Itoi, and Itō, and it led to interesting conversations. But I know I completely understand what you mean. And also, yeah, you got like 10 pulls for Yvonne. Well, you get Yvonne for 10 pulls, which is a little bit crazy. I can tell, but it's fine. Thank you. I mean, this is a channel where, you know, we love yapping, so games are kind of like a pretext for yapping, but we'll play Hytale in a bit probably. But yeah, I think it's like very... Hear me out. I'm hearing you out, Secret. Again, I think it's like a very interesting dilemma of like certain games trying to be like a bit more gentle and friendly with their players, with their daily routines or weekly routines, but at the same time, they are here to make money, so they are not your friends. And some companies try to, you know, find a nice balance, but it's a bit complicated. No dailies, no weeklies, just game. But like at this point, I'm not playing like multiplayer games, right? I think that's the thing. She's leaving me out. Because, okay, my take. As like a retired player on 14. I don't do content on 14. Like I know there was like a patch yesterday, like the 7.45. I did not start that. I barely like. I just did like the update basically of the patch this morning. Not having to like grind every week for like tomes is so good. I just log in when I want to do like 2 roulettes. Like I'm back into like my era of just doing like trials because it's so quick to do, you know, 10 minutes and then I'm out and I'm done for today. I'm like, oh, I played the game and it's so nice. And then it's RP. And I love that because like RP is like I plan that when I want to write. I want to write, there's an event that like feels nice. Then I go into the game and I can choose like my schedule. And it's never like time that is wasted because I'm not like at the mercy of other players through PF, for example. And I think it's like kind of the situation. It's that like I enjoy games when I'm able to kind of like build my own schedule that feels like it fits nicely in my life. And right now, you know, playing gacha games, I think like some of them, they fit like nicely. And I don't like, I'm working from home, so I can like easily do like those gacha dailies, whatever. And they feel relaxing to me to some extent. But at least I feel that even if like the game is predatorial to some extent and is trying to like instill a routine for me, I don't mind it very much. And that's how like I treat my relationship to gacha games. If like a gacha game is really like asking too much of me and it doesn't fit into my rotation, then it's just out and I have like no qualm putting it out of my rotation. And the latest example was like Uma Musume. I love the concept of Uma Musume. I love the universe. I kind of like keep in touch with it like through friends, through people that are playing the game, and through other things than the actual like gacha game. But if you want to be kind of like serious with Uma Musume with your daily currency, you kind of like need to do like 1 or 2 runs, full runs per day, which is like taking 20 minutes of active playing. It's not like, oh, you need to log in and the game is like playing by itself. You have like decisions to make. You need to choose like the right trainings and stuff. And that was like, I don't have like, 20, 40 minutes of active playing where I cannot like work at the same time. And so it went out of my rotation. And that was kind of like the thing that happened with 14 as well. It's like, I do enjoy 14, but this requirement of like grinding for tomes every week and like having to do Savage if you want to gear yourself and you don't have like any other good options for gearing, they're adding like the new, advanced criterion or whatever mode, but it's still like not something that you want to do because the rewards are so low. Yeah, I'm like not engaging with that, and I'm playing like the game in like the way I feel like the most pleasant, which is like logging in from time to time, OPing, and that's all. Recently, I've noticed I'm drawn to XP, HR. What do you mean by HR? Kind of grindy games, and it feels like they're a job. Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I think the way for them not to be a job is like you need to feel like they're just things you do with your hands while you're doing something else. Watching videos, listening to podcasts, whatever, watching films. But like if you're just like playing a grindy game like on first monitor, I think like it's insane. A new WoW X-Pack is better than a X.X5 patch. Well, to no one's surprise, right? Of course, I have a lot of people playing WoW around me right now. They seem to be enjoying their time. I think like people are saying that like Midnight is quite fun. I've seen like Mythic 0 runs. So it is what it is. Also, what's the point of gearing in 14 if you aren't doing exactly... I had this exact same conversation yesterday. The only point outside of Ultimate... The only point is literally grinding scores, grinding passes. And who cares about like good passes? What's the point of doing Ultimate if you're not world? Exactly. I mean, okay. The point of doing Ultimate, is sometimes it's just to see 2 lesbians, by the way. So who knows? Who knows? But yeah, there are like obviously dark patterns in game design that like... How do we solve them? Well, we solve them by having games that are not like predatorial because they are not here to make like money on your daily playing of the game. But like you shouldn't play like game as services, right? They should add more lesbians into all content plus too. Miyamoto suggests exploring gameplay concepts that differ from current trends. Yes, exactly. So to go back to this interview, because we're yapping like a lot. So this interview, again, like for you, like Jaconesia, as you just arrived, was done in 89. So we were, like, as I was saying, we were at the tail end of the SNES or Famicom. And you had like certain hits, like, the Mario games had been released, like the Mario Bros. Game has been released. Zelda was released like 3 years prior. Mother had been released. Like you had like those big hits at like a transitional period, and they're peering into the future and being like, okay, what do we do now? as like, you know, we are finishing working on like a console, and the pipeline is to go like on a new console, which is obviously the Super Famicom, Super SNES, and the 16-bit environment, at least for console specifically. And they were saying that like, yeah, there's some kind like they're trying to explore like what would work in the future, what kind of like concepts they want to explore to make like games still a living and interesting thing, and not like, you know, the same thing over and over again. Waiting for the Liz Yuri Ultimate. So true. There was like, I think Liz was here in the event with Yugiri. Okay, so let's continue to read a little bit. I think there are plenty of possibilities in game design. For instance, imagine a game where you input something, and when you check back a month later, it's transformed into something totally unexpected. We don't have anything like that, do we? So I don't exactly know what he's talking about. Obviously, you have like a screenshot of Dobutsu no Mori, so Animal Crossing, which is kind of doing that. I think like you have like those permanent world MMOs that will do like something similar as well. I guess that's also the trend of like Tamagotchi. That's the trend of like, well, that's very like way later, but like all the, you know, Nintendogs and stuff. So that's interesting. How people living in an apartment today can't keep pets because we're in Japan. If someone who was obsessed with the joy of having a pet made a game that captured that feeling, I think it would become a huge craze. And since it's a simulation, you could even include the unfortunate parts, like the pet eventually passing away, as part of the experience. Miyamoto is crazy. It's incredible that Miyamoto comments here predicts the coming of games like Animal Crossing, Nintendogs, and Bandai Tamagotchi device, what we're saying, right? Sometimes just adding a little extra care to the details makes a world of difference. Like in Mario, if he falls into the water, he starts to swim. Most games will just have you fall in and it's game over, but you've prepared a response to that. That's a massive distinction. I think players are starting to demand that kind of thoughtfulness much more now. That's because games today are still based on the style of play from the 100 yen coin-op era, I think. Everyone tries to do the same things within that same rigid framework, so it feels like we've hit a dead end and there's nowhere left to go. But if you just move the starting line, you can find plenty of use for those old frameworks. Very interesting, because it's obviously the way games have evolved from the arcade mentality, and that was a completely different like level design, game design, because you were expecting like very slow progress from run to run, a bit like when Ellie was talking about like playing games, Final Fantasy V like as a roguelike, by replaying every time. It kind of like puts you in a very like constraining like environment. But obviously, like getting out of it and getting, for example, things like save cartridge, which was the case for Zelda, right? You had to have like this cartridge with like the saving like ability. You had like this sprawling RPG that you could do like in several sessions, and I think that's what like made Zelda 1 such like a very interesting game. Cap West Wind Ultimate, what are they talking about in here? Siggy smiles. I remember playing Super Mario Land. So yeah, the portable game, right? Which was a little bit weird, obviously. But that was an interesting like foray into like portable like Mario games, although I think that like Super Mario Land 2 was like better. For example, the problem that everyone tries to build action games based on Earth. What if gravity worked differently? What if there were 2 different types of atmospheres? If you start thinking about those things, of those kind of shifts, even within the same old framework, you might stumble upon something totally unexpected and incredibly fun during development. There are plenty of people in America doing exactly that, which is why new things keep emerging there. To be fair, that's what happened to RPGs in Japan. Like, I know that like we love to talk about like Japanese RPG, but it's not something that really exists in Japan, obviously, because for them it's just RPGs. If you check like the history of RPGs, most of them were like lifted from the old formula that came from the West of, you know, Ultima and wizardry, of D&D style RPGs, dungeon crawlers, what we call like the DRPGs. And they kind of like streamline that formula into something that like is what people think about when they think about like JRPG. They think about Dragon Quest, they think about like Final Fantasy, about like Zelda to some extent. But the thing is, if you check like, again, Zelda versus Hidlid versus Dragon Quest versus Tower of Druga versus whatever other games, Ultima, you won't see a lot of differences because like for Japanese developers, those were all like RPGs. And that's kind of like what Miyamoto is saying here, is that like you take a formula and you try to like implement things that are working. Okay, you have like the Ultima system, very good. What if we do something like bump combat and it's kind of like creating hit lead that is creating like Zelda 1 and so on. Yes, etc. Oh my god, why are you talking about bass fishing? The landmark title Mother. I mean, Mother is like obviously like such an important game at that time. And hello May, I hope that you are doing well and you're not stuck in your orb. The morb, that's crazy. Volume control, track balls, mice. One interesting thing about that, to be fair, speaking of like, because we are seeing like an ADV renaissance right now, so ADV for adventure games in Japan, which is like something that is a bit specific in Japan because they love like command menus to like drive the action. And I think that like, for example, Paranomicite are very interesting because they're kind of like examining the medium in a meta way. So you have things like turning around in what is essentially like an ADV / visual novel, but you are turning around, the world is like, well, you are in a like 3D sphere, there are things like playing with volume, with saves and stuff that's part of like the experience. And I think like there are always like very interesting things you can do with genre. There are always like ways to set up things in interesting in an interesting manner. I think Ace Attorney was interesting. Then there was like kind of the trend of Danganronpa going like over the top, and that was something we capture in later games. So you can iterate on the same genre again and again and again, as long as you understand why this genre was so successful, what makes like those like base element so great, and how can you like improve or subvert those elements. Like for example, ADV, it was kind of like a puzzle game. You had to talk a lot to the same people and they wouldn't like, it wouldn't be obvious. If you played Ace Attorney, you can remember that like as long as like you kind of like talk to a person and you exhausted a topic, you have like a sort of check mark, kind of like appearing next to like the topic. But in like most of like the ADV tradition, you don't have like those check marks because it was meant as a puzzle of like, no, you need to talk several times with that person and you need like to kind of like pester them, and that will like unlock the next leg of your adventure and whatever. And that might be very frustrating like for modern gamers that are not used to this like syntax and grammar of gaming anymore. But I think part of it is like you need to struggle with like very specific like dialogue puzzles And that's what made those games like interesting. Should we keep like this exact design nowadays? Not necessarily. I think games like Paranormal Sight, games like the latest Famicom Tante Club, they are putting like those dialogue check marks when you really have exhausted the topic. But the method to exhaust the topic is not necessarily like self-evident, and you still have some amount of like puzzle solving that you need to do. So I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. Alternative dinosaur vampire games. That's called Dino Crisis. What could be fun about using this? Yeah, well, we won't read too much here, but like I think we know that Miyamoto is really someone that is talking about the connection between like hardware and software, about like how fun it is to move things. You know that Nintendo was like a toy company first, so that's why like there's a very interactive quality to their games. When you were making Mother, were you conscious about trying to create a game that was unlike anything before? No, I wasn't thinking that way at all. Breaking the rule just for the sake of saying you broke them is just bragging, and it isn't very interesting. I was making this game for myself. I wanted things to move and feel the way I thought they should. The basic gameplay of Mother isn't actually that different from standard RPGs, true. That said, I did include a lot of unnecessary stuff, and I purposefully did things that I knew would draw complaints from the hardcore otaku crowd. During the development, I kept insisting that my way was the right way, but to tell you the truth, I was actually pretty nervous about it. Yeah, I suppose this is where it feels a bit different from previous RPGs. As a creator, you're always excited by the possibility that the audience might actually surpass you. But at the same time, you harbor this malice, this desire to make them believe they have surpassed you when you're actually pulling the strings. It's the same with novels. You might tell people, oh, this part is just a cheap tearjerker, while secretly putting your whole heart into writing it. In other words, you don't build every part of the work with the same intent. I think that's an area where games still have a lot of room to grow. That's why I was so happy to see players didn't feel they had to do everything in Mothers. Exactly. You can play with tropes. I think it's a very important thing in like game design. Playing with like existing tropes is not a bad thing as long as like you have a clear intent of what you want to do. An homage and an artistic drive. And that's why like on a pure like mechanical standpoint, I cannot like fault, for example, Clair Obscur, because I think in like an homage, it kind of works. It's just if they do something again with Clair Obscur, it's completely cooked. But iterating on things that work, trying to surprise people, that's also the key of like creation. Walk to tree, pick up leaf, so true. Combine tree with leaf, kill god, pick up god, make marmalade. So true. The average makes me think of like this game. How is it called? Tomato Adventure, right? I think. No, it's not Tomato Adventure. Wait, I'm lost. It's a Princess Tomato? Yes. Okay, so that's the game. It's like an ADV game where you, well, I have nothing else to say. Would you save the Princess Tomato? If you build the game with a strict one-to-one relationship between every lock and key, you end up with a perfectly logical, rational game. By moving away from it, things immediately got a bit messy in Mother, but I think something different emerged because of it. There aren't really many games out there that include things you simply don't have to do. Which is very interesting. Because it's very different from like an open world game where you have like chests to collect or whatever, things like this. Because open world game, you don't have to do anything, but like you're kind of expected to do everything at some point, right? Here we are really talking about quests, as they say, like quests that you can completely ignore and stuff like this, and just like exploring the game in like the order that you want. And I think like I don't mind open world games, but like I prefer way more games that are, how can I say, like closed zones that you can explore in a non-linear fashion. To be fair, like imagine Metroidvania if there were RPGs. We distinguish between field and performance system in the game structure. Mario is built that way too. Say I want to add some funny animation for an enemy at the end of the level, and I show it to the programmers or hardcore gamers. They say, it's the end of the level, no one's going to even see that. But I just tell them that's fine. There will always be some people who stop to watch. Exactly. You need to like choose your battles. You need to not please everyone, but also to do things that are fun. Obviously in gacha gaming, again, we're back to it. Oh my god. Thank you for half, well, not even, I wanted to say like half, a cycle, but we are like exactly 600 years of fishing. Thank you very much, Sky. And it's very nice to see you here. I hope you have some fun today. And thank you for the sub. It's very appreciated. What was I talking about? I don't know. I can't remember. No, don't try to please everyone. You have to choose your battles, and sometimes you will alienate certain players, but that's fine. That's completely fine. You have to sleep now, but you'll be back at sometimes. Okay, thank you for coming on YouTube, Jack Amnesia, and I hope you'll have like a wonderful night. It's nice to be back. Hello everyone. Hello Sky, you have been missed. I missed you, I missed chat. And I'm very glad that you can be here today. So, okay, what I was saying, don't try to please everybody. At certain point, you need to make like, you need to believe in your vision, and that like adding certain things or going in a certain direction will be well received by certain people, and that's what matters. I think Paranormal did very well to that extent, because the first games were like, oh, we are going like into horror territory. This is really Paranormal. This is like a horror game. And then you play Paranormal 1, and it's not the case in the second half, and it's not the case at all, I would say. Like, it's still a frightening game, but it's not that prevalent in the second game. And I think like it works. So we know that they kind of like toned down like the horror elements because people were like too afraid from the first game. But also like you make a game that is about like mermaids and heritage and culture and people living the world. And in this particular thing, and in this game that is like also talking about like misogyny, the horror is you don't need like crazy horror. The world is horrific enough for women. And I think that like it makes sense to not like want to please the horror heavy crowd, because you had like a message that you wanted to give on women and on society and Japan and prefectures and revitalization and the aging of the population and stuff. And that's the same thing that you find in Silent Hill F, but that we'll talk about it in the next video that we'll release at some point. So obviously I'm talking about story, but like you can do the same thing with gameplay elements, because people will always find interesting things to do with it. And I think that's the beauty of speedruns, for example. It's like you're reinventing the rules for yourself, And that makes you able to kind of like reinterpret the game and how the game was designed, why items were put in that place. And that's great. That's like the emergent style of gameplay and game design. Waves at cloud +2. The sky was beautiful today. The sky is beautiful every day, is the thing. Spring is coming to the north. Okay, I'm just yapping at that point. I wonder if I can make him dance, and then when they see it, it's so fun to watch. There are so many enjoyable things in the game just beyond beating it. Like the frog suit in Mario, that thing is basically useless. Okay, frog enjoyers. That's like a special for Sigrid. According to the hardcore, that's a total waste of an item. They actually write do not pick up the frog suit in their guides, but we love that thing. That's why he loves playing with kids. Exactly, like, that's like childhood, childlike wonder. He's a very strict person. You are strict about creating a space that is truly fun to play in. Exactly. Creating a game is creating like a sandbox. Even if like your game is not a sandbox per se. But it needs to have like this philosophy behind it. And I think all Nintendo games are sandboxes in their own right. The moon is beautiful tonight, chat. After seeing the moon, I think I can die. I do think the direction we're headed right now is the right one. Games are systems after all. We call RPG simulated experience, but the real fun of RPG came from things like seeing your character grow in power beyond anything you imagine, or the simple joy of saving up money to buy something. There's so many enjoyable elements like this. The story was just something we layered on top of that after the fact. That's why those games work perfectly well as a linear experience. Okay, so that is kind of like the Miyamoto take, which is like a little bit weird nowadays. I think like most people will agree that like RPGs are also something like beyond systems, that like story might be the most important thing, or just like standing in the world and experiencing the music and stuff is like a big thing. But we know that Miyamoto is always like a system first person, so it is what it is. Didn't we have a blood moon yesterday? Yes, it was a total like lunar eclipse into like into blood moon. But now just having a car is taken for granted. What made those games fun have become old hat. So now we have added more complex stories to the mix, but the drama of the story is really a question of what kind of field you build for it. True, but there's a connection, yeah, between story and system, is true. The problem is when you build an open field type of games, you have to provide so many follow-ups for every possible player action. If you build that kind of world using the same amount of memory as a linear game, players will end up complaining because it's too short. They will quite literally feel shortchanged if they compare it to a longer linear game. Even if the world is technically just as expensive, they feel like the playtime was shorter. Yes, I used yes on the prompts constantly. I designed them with the assumption that players want to try both options, but the memory used to include all those unique no responses was memory we had to shave off from the length of the main path. The great thing about computer is that you can have do-overs. In real life, you don't get those. It would be miserable if you couldn't try again in a game, but that's interesting how having those do-overs makes the experience less tragic. Very, very true. You can even die on purpose. In the real world, if you choose yes, you can never see what would have happened with no. But the essence of play is wanting to see both. That's just the nature of games. If we made games where dying meant starting over from zero every single time, people would find that world too harsh to want to play. Oh my god. That's a crazy thing. Because I think that's like a very clear jab to a certain kind of like roguelike. And I do agree that like some of them, they just don't work. Because like it's being a roguelike for the sake of being a roguelike and you don't have like anything interesting in it. For example, Hades. I don't like the gameplay of Hades because I think like the bestiary is like too small and it's too repetitive, even if you have like different weapons. But I like the idea of like having to like do runs and you get like snippet of like stories with like the gods every time. That's like, I'm more interested in the story of like Hades than in like the pure gameplay actiony part of it. And I think that the story was a thing that like used the roguelike element very well. That's why I think it would be fascinating if RPG moved away from just making the scenarios more complex. Instead, imagine a game with only 5 houses, but where the neighborly relations within those 5 houses were endlessly deep. It'd be really interesting if more people started making things with that kind of focus. Even if 100 of games like that came out, I bet every single one of them would be enjoyable in its own way. You know what? It's literally... oh my... I forgot the name! I completely forgot the name. How was it called? You know the game. You know the game. It's called... Pathologic, right? And that's literally Pathologic. You have like 3 different routes, and you go like into this world that is like quite small, and that is on a timer, and you have like to understand what is happening by going through those different like routes and endings and stuff. And you kind of like see things like that also like in Majora's Mask, to be fair, with like the time flowing without you. Pathologic mentioned, and I'm not even like the greatest fan of Pathologic, to be fair, but I think like Pathologic, because it's a bit too like rough for me, like mostly on a very like, oh, the game is like too friction heavy for me. Like I'm too much of a baby to play Pathologic, but it's like such an insane concept that like it's very unique, and we should like see more of that. Hello, welcome back, Jocamnesia. You can make a linear game as long as you want, though. Well, it won't feel short if the gameplay is compelling enough that people play it a lot. Eventually, we'll probably solve the memory limitation we have now. I'm looking forward to a time when we can have smarter computers with something like built-in interpreter that can automatically organize the parts that don't make logical sense or even fix scenario bugs for us. Once that happens, we'll be able to move to the next level. I have high hopes for it. My goddess. He's looking into the future. So very interesting, because they probably did not foresee that like games would like swell to, you know, like RPGs back then were like kind of like, let's say, you could finish them in like 20 hours. They would probably be surprised to learn if you tell them right at this period that like RPGs are like 100 hour plus. There's a new software on Macintosh called HyperCard. It's a system that lets you create things that are almost like interactive picture books. It is designed so that if the creators just throw their scenario in, the system builds the world for them. There's a game on it called The Manhole. You slip into a manhole and find yourself in a surreal world like Alice in Wonderland. You might go into one room and find a dragon that bakes cookies with its own breath, or another room where the rabbit is watching TV. And you can use the remote to change the channels and see different pictures on the screen. It's a game where you wander around looking at things here and there. Kind of like, you know, the text, because it's what it is, right? It's like this text-based adventure that kind of gave way like to like point and clicks later on, right? Picture books are fun just to flip through, right? And really, there isn't anything else people read quite as often as a picture book. A child will flip through the same book for 2 or 3 years. With HyperCard, you can use a fairly realistic animation and fit about like 600 or 800 pages worth of picture book memory into it. I think that represents a real future for how computers can be used. It's a level of depth that a physical book could never catch up to, yet it's all contained in a small playable size. It's quite fun. I mean, literally foreseeing like, you know what, kind of like modern point and click would be. The never-ending story, yeah. How long will players stick with a game with no goal? If a game has no goal whatsoever, they'll probably just end up tossing it aside. You need something, even if just saying the sunset is beautiful, let's go over there. Of course, the actual joy of the journey isn't limited to the sunset itself, but you still need that initial reason to go. Exactly, the sunset is there as a form of catharsis, but in reality you are enjoying everything but the sunset. It would be wonderful if games could achieve that same kind of balance. To be fair, what was the last time you played, let's say, an RPG, where like the ending was better than like the journey? I don't even have like an example like this right now. Like in big RPGs, I don't see one boss that felt like more cathartic like than the exact rest of the adventure. Because it's always about like the journey. Maybe only game I found like very, very sharp on its ending was like the Wind Waker. Because the ending was meant as a transition between the old generation and the new generation. But other than that, like, I don't know. It's incredibly difficult to make someone feel a sense of purpose while still ensuring the journey itself is the fun part. Up until now, reaching the goal was the primary objective, and I think we've reached a peak of that style of design. Just as people were starting to wonder if games were only about reaching the end, something like Tetris, a pure game, if there ever was one, comes along and shakes things up. I think the very definition of game is about to change. We already moved away from the arcade era, and we're taking the next step. It's something I'm excited about. I'd love if we could just say, if it's fun, it's a game. To be fair, it's also like foreshadowing the style of like those artistic games that require minimal interaction. And that just tell their story through, small, like, micro gamey interaction. And you always have the question of, like, what is a game? Where do you put the limit of, like, this is a game and this is, like, not a game, this is a book, or this is, like, a film? And I think it's a question that doesn't really matter that much to some extent. Because Miyamoto is very right about it. Like, I wouldn't say if it's fun, but like if you find some amount of value, be it artistic, fun, or whatever else, in like this electronic experience, then for me it's a game, it's a video game. Ta-ta-tam. Like the expert machine from Blade Runner, the one that goes choo-choo-choo and scans photo. I love stuff like that, but I wonder if it will take a while for the audience to learn how to enjoy themselves without the plot constantly moving forward. Yeah, true. Kind of what like this Breath of the Wild idea was. And I think like that's the very big thing with Breath of the Wild. I never finished the game. Like I played so much of it, but I never finished the game because I felt like going into like Hyrule Castle and actually like beating Ganon was kind of like clashing with like the experience of like a very like open-ended exploration that I was doing, which is also like how I play Genshin. I just like standing around and like listening to music and watching like the landscape, and it makes me happy. And I think like that's great as a game. Framing this interactive experience as book or other types of familiar media, which is kind of like what you have with like those, choose your own adventure books. You never succeed unless you first get them to give up on the expectations. It's like someone who's dying to eat eel. If you give this guy a steak, he'll just get mad because it doesn't taste like fish. I suspect we're going to run into that kind of reaction. If you were to make a game like now, you'd probably have to frame it as being a professional natural history or something. Like you get a degree based on how many insects you've researched. Otherwise, I don't think people would bother. I don't know what they're talking about. Said the most interesting thing would be if everyone could become like Hiroshi Yamada. He digs deep into a subject with his incredible manierist intensity, but then he'll serve you a completely different dish in a totally unexpected context. I think that kind of intellectual play is perfectly suited to computers. True, which was like a good thing like with computers for a long time when you had like those very creative games in like the 80s, 90s. That went into very, very wild direction because they were at a transitional moment technology-wise, and it kind of like pushed them like very far in the future. It's about time we stop thinking of this as games at all. Games are just what's popular right now, so they draw the attention. But you think about it as having a computer and a television, that's enough. We shouldn't be comparing things to Tetris or RPG and worrying about like which one wins. It's not that kind of world. True. I've been postponing fighting Ganon for so long because I think there's no purpose in doing so. Like that was, as they said, that was like the sunset to like prompt you into adventure. And you had like the plateau exploration as kind of like your opening sequence that is teaching you the ropes. But after that, you're free to do whatever you want. And I think like games like this are great. I mean, it's literally why people are playing Minecraft, right? There's no, okay, like you can, wow, you can beat the Ender Dragon in Minecraft, but who cares? Like, it serves at like a sunset, maybe. But there are so many things that you can do. And it doesn't really matter what you do. Game. So he wants like your race is scheduled for such and such date and time next week, and then you just wait home. First they will be qualifying round and maybe like 50 cars all tier across the track together, and you see the result. And then for the main event, the top like 26 players from across the country would race. You find yourself saying things like, man, I can't believe I lost to that guy, and you end up making new friends. From there, you could coordinate with those friends to set up your own races, saying, hey, you better show up for the Kanto Regional next month. It's literally like what multiplayer gaming had become. Doing it that way makes the actual playing experience more compact, and while it has the outer form of a game, it wouldn't really be called a game anymore, but a new way to play using a computer. Exactly, because there's the game per se, but the experience of playing a game, I believe, goes beyond the game itself. It's like a lived experience because you're like interacting physically with like your medium. And as we said about like Twilight Draga, sometimes you're like sharing information with people and stuff. There's like a whole communitary side with like playing games, exchanging like experiences that I think make it worth it. The same way like films are way more than films because you talk about them with some people and this shared experience, like the conversations that are arising from them, is kind of like creating new meaning for the media itself. So they're kind of like talking also about like the kind of like competition that like Nintendo set up at some point. Entertainment as a broad genre. You have this specific category of interactive entertainment, and video games are just a part of it. When pornography escalates, it eventually crosses into the grotesque. I think the world of hidden secrets in games has almost reached the same grotesque level. It's reached a point where it isn't measured by common sense anymore. It's just people getting bored and looking for stronger and stronger simulation. We've hit a wall. When you're at a point where you have no choice but to go grotesque, you have to start thinking of new ways to use the medium in a healthy way. As long as there are people willing to play and keep on creating, and thank you for the health check. We keep on creating, new things will continue to emerge. If there aren't any good games out there, I don't think you should feel the need to go out of your way to find one. As long as you have a computer and a TV at home, you can always come back whenever something truly great funny comes along. I'm not going to tell people they have to stay with us forever, though I suppose that sounds a bit arrogant, doesn't it? Anyway, that's just how I see it. So Miyamoto is telling you to touch some grass. If you don't like what games are doing nowadays, just go read a book, he's saying. As long as people out there, as there are people out there who will buy books like this one, I think we still have plenty to look forward to. That's a very prescient interview, to be fair. I think like he is like making points that are the exact same points that we are making nowadays. Because we're at a moment of crisis with video games. Like the industry is collapsing, nothing is working, AAA games industry doesn't work, like the indie route is like not working either because like most studios are like crashing before like releasing their first game. So what do we do instead? And like as players, I think like there's this sense of like, yes, fostering interesting interactions with what we have right now, building like an ecosystem that is bigger than the games themselves, and kind of like making some gameplay decision arise from the way we are interacting with a medium. And again, I think that speedrun is super interesting because it kind of led to an entire genre within like, you know, video games with like certain games like Neon White, Celeste or whatever that are conducive and that are like designed to like facilitate those kind of play style. I think the idea of like randomizers is also super interesting. This idea of like swapping the game on its head and kind of like going against the developer intent and seeing how things would still work with like objects being like randomized in completely random positions, right? And that gives ideas to developers. There's obviously a symbiotic relationship between players and creators, and the kind of like zone of interaction of cross-pollination is the game itself, and how you're designing it, how you're playing it. And I understand that like it's easy to stay like in like genres that like we see again and again, and it has been the case for like forever. You have like, we talked about that at the beginning, those genres that were like dominant in the market, be it like shoot them ups, and then platformers, and then shooters, and then open worlds, and now roguelikes, card-based roguelikes. They're dominant and it's okay, but within like that context, you will find some emergent like ideas that will bring some new things. And I'm always very happy to see like that certain genres have gone through renaissance. Maybe sometimes, you know, with one or two games or like a collection of games that kind of like push the media in another direction. We talked about ADV and how like it's a bit more interactive nowadays, and there's a new way of telling stories, of using like the modern tools. But it's also the case for like CRPG, for example. I think it's really great that we have exited the world of you know, those classic infinite engine CRPGs to kind of like explore things where story is kind of like the important point, and also like modularity of the experience. And I think like a good example of it obviously is Disco Elysium, that is starting to have like a very deep influence on the rest of the medium, where you see like games that are inspired by it, and I think it's very interesting. I don't know if you have seen it, but there was this game that released like a few days ago or yesterday, I can't remember, and that seems to be like very, very interesting. Esoteric Ebb, which is like a mix of like Disco Elysium and D&D, but it's way more than that. So you play a cleric and I don't exactly know what is happening on this adventure, but you can see how, yes, esoteric ebb. And it looks so good. So I want to do it. I will probably not do it on stream because that's something I think I want to enjoy myself. Since it's like it looks like a very nice experience. But yeah, if you play the game before me, please write like something on the Discord server about like how you feel the game feels like, because I'm really interested by the game on like literally all the facets. I think it looks visually like very, very good. The concept seems super interesting, and it seems to be like a nice twist on D&D by being like more than D&D. So we are going like through, like nothing is completely, you know, dark in this particular period of gaming. I think we have like a return of also FMV games with like the Chinese games because they are like cheap to make. It's great. They open like opportunities for the future, and I hope that like it will continue like this and that players will engage with like those type of games. And that's kind of like the point of this stream, right? It's like we're trying to, well, maybe not play games per se, but I try to at least highlight them when we're yapping, because I think that those games deserve to be seen as like attempts to bring some new in the old, or taking the old to make some new. And that's great. That's what like innovation is and what like looking forward is. So as much as I can be like disillusioned by like the fact the current situation of gaming to some extent, I think that like nothing is completely lost. Obviously, like, you know, the good solution is also to have money. If like governments were funding more of like those things, then we would have like more sustainable like environments for creators to explore like interesting concepts. Because what like is not said is in this interview here, we're in like 89. This is still the height of the bubble economy. Because in Japan at that point, you had like whatever concept, you can make a game, they will give you money to make a game with it. You had like no limit except like your imagination and technical limitations. But money was not a problem. Today is very different, right? Like money is a big problem for developers across the world because of inflation, because of cost of living and all. We need like public policies to fund art in a way that is productive and conducive to like innovation and bold visions. You make good art when you have your belly full, basically. And a good example of that, for example, like just to finish on this discussion, is Iceland, right? Iceland has an absurd number of people writing books. I think like at least 10% of like people in Iceland are publishing a book, which is like the highest rate on Earth. And you could ask yourself, how are they doing that? Very simply, because like if you write a book, it's subsidized by the government. So they're pushing people to explore like writing as like a professional or semi-professional activity. And not everything is good among like those like Icelandic literature. But the thing is, just having, as like Virginia Woolf was saying, a room of your own, a space where you can write and you know that like you will have the money to continue writing and making art, that's how in time you will have people that will output something amazing. And even if it's not amazing, then you have like something that you can call like Icelandic literature, because it's rooted in like a culture that lives like off the support from the government. And we have like things like this in Europe, to be fair, you know, like in France and in Europe, like at a national level and at a European level, we have like cultural funds that are helping some studios to output their projects. But the thing is, like, with the current policies that we are experiencing right now, we see a drastic like decrease of like those fundings for art and for like game production in general. And it begs the question of like, what do we want for our humanity? Where do we want to put the money? Do we really consider that making art is something that is not worth investing in as a society? And if the answer is yes, then I, as your resident Fox librarian, I believe that is not a world worth living in. So we should fight. We should like promote the idea of like a world where art becomes important again. Becomes like a testament of our humanity and our will to gaze into the future in a productive way without forgetting who we are. And we just need money. We just need money to do that. So that's it for me. And you know what? We could even like end the stream on that because it seems like a good conclusion. But yeah, very, very interesting like interview like in 89. I'm really happy to have read that, even if it was like way longer than I expected, but it is what it is. Because at that point it's too late to play. Oh my god, I will need to change the thumbnail again so that the video on YouTube is not a lie. Maybe one day I'll make like a schedule and we'll kind of like respect what is in the schedule. But that day is not now. You're online on Twitch right now. Yeah, I'm doing double casting Jackmnesia, so I think like in the YouTube description you can find a link to the Twitch channel. But if you cannot find, it's twitch.tv/Miyabi Mitsuhara, which I can like technically link in the chat if like I'm not completely cooked. Something like this, yes. But yeah, and also like on this topic, because like I think we discussed a little bit about like remasters and remakes on this channel as like a thing that like keeps happening nowadays, and it's just like it seems to be like the trend for like those big studios that don't know what to do, right? It's like, oh, just output like a remake or remaster and it will be good enough. The thing is, I don't think like they are necessarily bad things, because you can always like rethread like a previous game and kind of like update it for like the modern era. I think a very good example of it was Final Fantasy Tactics, because the message that the game had back then, at the moment when Japanese people were experiencing like the financial crisis of the 90s, so the lost decades, you can put it in your bingo. The game being released right now, like last year, when Japan and the world is going through another cycle of crisis, of bigotry, and of inflation, gains new meaning again. And for me, this type of like context attentive re-release, I think it is interesting. Rewriting is interesting. I would have liked if Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, whatever, was a bit more bold with its like rewriting to kind of like fit modern philosophy and like have a discourse on like what modern art is and what it means to like experience art again, making new from the old. But it becomes a problem, those remakes and remasters, when it's stifling innovations, when it feels like a backward step instead of like something that you can like use in a productive way to tell a story, to send a message, or to be in tune with what the actual, what the current gameplay landscape is. And the question is like, how do we escape that? How do we escape that situation of like those empty cash grabbing remakes? I believe for me, the situation, the solution would be to make all those old games accessible. If everyone was able to play like those old games that they did not grow up with and kind of like have a look at the past through the window that this game, book, or whatever is opening, then people will feel attuned to that culture a little bit and would try to like draw comparisons and to like drive those ideas in a productive way into the present. But right now, what you see instead are games, remakes that are trying to replace like the original, which is not the point. I think the point of like a remake, a remaster a bit less, but a remake is to stand on its own right and tell something a little bit different from like the original. And like there was like a very interesting thing because you maybe have seen that like Evangelion is getting like a new anime by Yoko Taro. It will be what it will be. I don't want to say that it will be good or bad. I don't want to comment on that because I think it's uninteresting. The interesting fact for me is that like Evangelion was like an era of storytelling. And that era kind of like ended with the rebuild. The exact film depends for like every person, depending on like what appreciation you have for the series. But something that you will hear a lot is that like for some people, 3.0 plus 1.0 was like horrible because it brought the series in a direction they did not like. And you might remember, if you're like attuned to like kind of like anime discussions and stuff, I hope they have the gay boy in it. But everybody is gay in Evangelion anyway. But something that you hear, like, you know, in like anime discussions, and we know that from like Anno's interview and stuff, is that Anno hated the otaku, hated like the fascination for like the series in a very like reductive way. And there are like theories that are very plausible that like Asuka is representing like Evangelion as a series, and Shinji is representing the otaku. And that's what happened like in the film, right? With like Shinji killing Asuka. And the point of like the latest film was kind of like to bring the series into something new. It's like, okay, we had this feud, you and me, like Anno and the Evangelion team and like the otaku, because we were like in a bad, you know, time in our life. I hated the otaku culture because it did not represent what I was believing in, and the otaku hated me because like they felt I was attacking them by making a film that was very different from what they expected. But now we can try to like look towards the future, because Evangelion shouldn't have to stay stuck in the past and in this feud and in this very like locked image that people had from the original series. So let's do something new with it. And we know that like Anno wanted to give like the series, or at least lend the series, the IP, to different people so that they can try to do something that they would like to do with Evangelion. And that's why like Yoko Taro has been chosen as kind of like the first one to like open like this series of, you know, external guests that are like writing something for the series, which is a very Japanese thing to do. Like the Detective Conan films every year are done by someone different that is coming with their own like baggage of, you know, cultural reference and stuff. Zelda has been doing that for quite a while now, giving the series to different developers so they can try their hand at it. We remember, for example, like Cadence of Hyrule by the creator of like Crypt of the Necrodancer as like a test of like, what if we give like Zelda to other people? What are they doing with it? Can it be interesting? And they have been like doing that like a little bit more, you know, with the Warriors and so on. And it's in general like this idea of like living franchises, like the Gundam style of like storytelling with like very different stories, different people working in it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's not the point. The point is that like you have a little bit of everything for everyone. And so Evangelion is going that route, which is something that Anno said he wanted to do like since, you know, 2005. And it's very interesting because you had like some reactions, a lot of reactions around me was like, oh, I hate this. They're destroying like what Evangelion is. They're attacking me personally by giving this to like Yoko Taro. I hate this already. And it's like, yeah, you don't have to like what Yoko Taro will do with the franchise or whatever. But I think the visceral reaction is very interesting in itself. It's this idea of like, no, I'm stuck in the past. I have like my vision of like what this series should be. And this is the kind of like the only one that is valid to some extent. And I'm not saying, you know, that those people are like evil people to think that. It's like, of course we have like franchises that like mean very specific things for us. And we want like the message that we have like to be like the major one. But it's also like very telling that people are not willing to accept that the world around them are changing. And that like we shouldn't have to be stuck in the past. Again, will this series by Yoko Taro be good? I don't know. Maybe not. Surely not, because like Yoko Taro alone, it's a little bit cooked, writing-wise. But I think it's worth exploring. At least to say that like the Evangelion that you liked is real. It exists. It's still there. If you want to watch like the original series, you can. But we need to see the future now. And that's the thing with like the end of like 3.0 plus 1.0. It's about like finding, it's about mourning something and then seeing like that the future is still beautiful and that we need to explore that. And as someone, I mean, I don't want to say that because like it goes back to like the discussion with like Carney that we had like the other day, right? Like on Monday, it's like, yeah, Carney was saying like nostalgia is never the solution. And I agree. You can be nostalgic for things, but you shouldn't let nostalgia rule you. It feels like Pokemon discourse. The newer designs are all bad and inspired type of comment. Exactly, it's like you like a certain type of like design, which is fine, but like the game is evolving. The game is like seeing the future. It's just you're getting old. You're getting like left out. Again, I think a lot of young people that are not that young anymore, but that lived through, you know, COVID and like those crises and all, it's like, they're not realizing that they are becoming the boomers that they hate. because they hate children. They hate children in general. They hate the fact that like people can have fun with things that they don't like. And you know, when it comes to like things that are like dark pattern, dark design, whatever, like it's completely fair. But when it's literally about just like art style, yeah, you are left out. And you know what? Maybe it's good that we leave you in the past because you're completely cooked. I have told several times that like I don't hate Pokemon. It's just Pokemon doesn't speak to me anymore. I wish I enjoyed Pokemon because I think it's like such a vivid universe, and there are a lot of like Pokemon things that I like outside of like the games. Like Pokemon Concierge, I think like is a tremendous foray into Pokemon media, and I think like I want to see things like this more in games and stuff. I think like Pokopia, the Pokemon like Stardew Valley and stuff, the reviews were like raving. It looks really good, and I'm genuinely glad that like children will be able to experience that. And you had like a lot of people that are like, oh, and even I was like, oh, are they really doing like Pokemon like Stardew Valley? But at the same time, it was kind of obvious that like the concept was going to arrive at some point. But it's great. We need games for children. We need games that are conveying new things, that are giving like things to children that are not stuck in the past. And yeah. You are either someone who prefers the OG or someone who prefers the movies. Hard to meet someone who like both. If we are speaking of Evangelion, true. Although I like both, because for me, like Evangelion is such like it's an organic series, and I think it's a series that is always like a reflection of its time and of like Anno's view on like people. And even if it's not like my favorite film, it's always something that I find super interesting. Like my favorite film is like 3.0 plus 1.0, to be fair. Because I think it's like such a beautiful conclusion that feels like socially minded and forward-looking, and that's what I like about my fiction. But yeah, I think it's about like being like open-minded and being able to accept that like things are not for you. You are team gay, quoi. I don't know what, like I want to play the next Pokemon, but I don't know what starter I will choose. I need to see the evolutions, to be fair. Young people who aren't that young, old light +2. The same in base was meant as a response for this not hating children. I hope. My baby mega young. Young plus. I'm just a child anyway, I crave whimsy. Whimsy is good. I think like people should have fun. I might be billions of years old, and whimsy is what keeps me going. Exactly, it's about finding joy in little things, I believe. Like I spend less time in social media, and like I kind of like have a more casual like relationship with media nowadays, because I'm not like into discourse as much as I was. At least, you know, not like participating in them, but just like seeing them online. And it makes things easier, right? To just appreciate things. I'm still, you know, harsh with things that I think are not good, but I'm completely fine with people liking what they like, as long as it's not like, you know, absolutely illegal and toxic and whatever. And yeah, we need whimsy to cope, so that's kind of the thing. If you don't propose a vision for the future, who will? If you don't believe in the future, what's the point of like being here still? And I know that it's easy to be like pessimistic and very sad and depressed about things, but like, again, if you don't think that like dreaming is still worth it, then what's the point of being here? So if we are to stay, we might as well enjoy our time here and try to you know, create something a little bit better. And there are like constructive way to be whimsy and also like demand good things and a better future. So I think a lot of people kind of like mistake being whimsy with like being oblivious to the world around you, and I think both of them are not exclusive. I think something doesn't need to be a masterpiece to be enjoyed. Sometimes it's nice to just experience something honest with all its flaws, sincerity. I think it's the most important thing. There was a very article that was prompted, that stemmed from like Japanese conversations on like social media, SNS. And somebody made the remark that like most people don't have any connection with Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest because those games are just never releasing. Like back then, when the franchises were at their beginning, they would release like a game every year or every 2 years maximum. So you would grow up as like a child and teenager and you would play like 6 games of the same series. And it kind of like shapes your perception of like RPGs, games, storytelling and stuff. But like if you are born in like, let's say you were born in what? Okay, let's say 2018. So you're like 18 years old right now. How many Dragon Quest games have you played? The answer is 1. How many Final Fantasy games have you played? The answer is 2. And you're not making like any memories like this. And I think, and the point of the article was like interviewing like children to kind of like ask them what kind of like game they consider like as important and for them. Like, do they know like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy? And like young people said, I don't know what you're talking about. Like the series, the RPG I'm playing is Pokemon. Yeah, because you have a Pokemon like every year. I'm not saying that like they should release Pokemon every year. I'm very happy that, you know, they are taking their time with like Wind and Waves. Wiwa. But this idea of like outputting games often, which is also like the Nintendo strategy of always having like a Mario game, be it like a mainline game or like a spin-off, sports spin-off or whatever, that's part of what makes the attachment to like a series. And that's how like you're creating this connection with people and you're talking to them. And Pokemon is doing so many things right outside of like games. I just want like the next one. I just want Wind and Waves to be as earnest as they have been. Because I think like the problems in Pokemon games is not that, you know, it's not like they are not sincere. It's mostly some kind of like bad management, incompetence to some extent, and too short of like deadlines and unwillingness to put the money in this game. But if they keep like the spirit of like earnestness and then just take a little bit more time, I think we can cook. I think Pokemon can be so back. And this is what I want for this series. Do mention, I remember that with Mega Man Battle Network, it feels so nice to grow up with a series. Exactly, like you feel a connection to it, and also like the creators feel a connection to you, and they know that their audience is like growing up. And so that's why like you have games that starts as like more like childish game, and then you can feel that they are a little bit more like teenager coded at some point, because they know that the core audience has like shifted into like a new like demographics. And I think it's great. And we should have more games like this. But alas, you know, in this world, I should have replied to Sigrid. Computer using failure. It is what it is. But yeah, I think it's like there are interesting things we can do. I think Nintendo, you know, as much as the executive decisions are absolutely insane. In terms of attachment and giving like magic to children and you know, even like adults, they are really, really good. They're really good because you have like so many different things. You have like games that are like so whimsical. Have you seen like the new like Yoshi whatever? Have you seen the art style that is kind of like Mysterious Book, that is kind of like Yoshi 2 coded? Look at this. Is it not like whimsy? Is it not like the type of game that makes you just happy to be alive? It's the thing also with like Kirby. It's like, why do you think people are playing Kirby? Because it's literally like a little pink ball that is just whimsical. And people like that. People like just being happy and seeing like cute things. I don't like cozy games as a descriptor because I think it's kind of like reductive to some extent. Exactly, it feels like a storybook. And that's like exactly what you see in like, I don't know if we have other screenshots, but like, that's kind of like the point of the game, right? You're literally exploring a book. Whatever. But the thing is, those games are called cozy games for a reason. Because people need like this coziness to go through life. Again, I don't like the descriptor, but I understand the intent. And like, whoa. What a surprise that Pokopia, that seems like, you know, the cutest thing of all time, was like one of the best, like, okay, look at that, open critics. Look at this for like a Pokemon game. We are at like 93% of critics are recommending the game. 88 on like open critic for like a Pokemon game, a spin-off Pokemon game. This is like absolutely insane. And the answer is like, obviously that's what people want to do. Like imagine like, okay, imagine yourself a child. You're back to when you have like 7 years old. For some reason, your parents bought a Switch 2. And this is like the first game you get. Of course you would be so happy. Like you see Pokemon everywhere because like Pokemon has always been everywhere. Like the cards are selling so well, even more than like before. The anime is going through a renaissance. You have like the cute series like Concierge and stuff. And we say, okay, you can just like live your life. Why would they +2? Because it's too expensive. And they just tell you, okay, this is a game where you just have like your Pokemons and you're like going through your life and like, you know, planting things and like creating your little town and stuff. That's what kids want. That's how like you're making like memories for them. And this is important, I think. Those games are important. So I hope that like it's really like genuinely extremely good. And I hope it will work. Because I would love to see more of like those like silly little, you know, concepts that I think will be very good to grow up with. Did Bertrand come to their homes and force them +2? My unrelatable Nintendo shield forcing people to buy like a Switch 2. Well, you know, like again, that's kind of like how I was able to use and borrow a Switch 2. Like some people I know have been like convinced by Bertrand to buy a Switch 2 to some extent. It is what it is. But yeah, all of that to say, come back whenever something truly great finally comes along. Trust the process. Trust that people will always try to do like great things. In the meantime, enjoy yourself. Go touch some grass, go read some books, go watch some films, whatever, have fun, relate to people, try to be happy in your life, and enjoy art. That's all that we can ask in this society. I do feel like a little many days. Very relatable game. Very relatable. Okay, it has been 3 hours of yapping. I have no more fuel in me. Like my throat is like dying. So, I might call it like the end. So again, we'll never play Hytale. I think it's like, I think I should like schedule like a stream again of Hytale. But I know like in my heart of heart that we'll never play the game. It becomes like a signal for like pure yapping stream. Okay, speaking of like streams, let's talk about next week. Next week I want to do like some co-working stream. I think like it would be fun to do that again. I think it worked well when we did it. So we might squeeze like a co-working stream on like a Wednesday or whenever. I need to do some prep and some reading for... Make it an inside joke. So true. You never explain. So true. So co-working stream maybe on like Wednesday, and then we'll kind of continue. We'll play Hytale yesterday. Every yapping stream will be Hytale from now on. And we'll never see the game. You know that like, okay. Like since earlier, the game was just here, by the way. I was watching the game, I was like on the main menu watching like the game and being like, yeah, why should I start playing? And one day we'll expect yapping so much it will be Hytale. So true. You are getting back to school next week. I wish you the best though for that, like holiday season is kind of finishing and stuff. And I hope that like school will not be too tiring for you, but I have high hopes that you will do excellent, Sky. But we can do that. So let's say Wednesday co-working. Again, I need to prep the next video. Yeah, we kind of like I want to continue still like Broken Sword. Try to finish the game as soon as we can. And then I want to do like a sort of educational stream at some point. I mean, we are doing educational streams, I think, every day. It's just like education is like, you know, baked into the yapping. But as I was telling a little bit before, like I'm trying to like... I've applied for like a science communication, like VTuber collective. So if I can actually do science communication, that would be great. So yeah, let's say 2 baked education. Baked with like chocolate chips inside. It's rising well thanks to the baking soda. Very, very good. I don't think I think 3 streams is too much. Like I will be too tired considering things. I was not talking about that, but oh my god, I was struggling so much with like, I'll just say that and then we leave. But I had like some EMGs, right? Like yesterday. So if you don't know what it is, they're like basically like putting a needle in your muscles and to kind of like measure the electric current that your muscles are doing to see like if it's normal or not. And I swear to God, like I got pierced by like 1 million like needles. I'm so sore. I can feel that like my, immune system has been flaring, being like, what is happening to me? Why do I have like things that are kind of like finding their ways like in my body and stuff? And right now, oh my God, it's like slightly painful, a bit like when you get like a shot. My immune system is kind of shocked, kind of like, it's literally when you get like a vaccine shot or whatever, getting shot with bullets, and like how it hurts like just a little bit after. Like there's like this time frame of like 2 hours where it's like really annoying. I feel like that since yesterday. I'm so cooked. Like my hands, not my hands, but my arms are like sore. My legs are sore. I want to die. My lower back is sore. I got like, oh my God, never again, never again. Death by 1,000 needles is not as fun as I expected. It's really not. It's really not, because even like the act of like the actual like needles getting inside you, sorry if like it's triggering, just go out of the stream. Like it's the end of the stream anyway. But like the act of needles like getting inside you is not that painful, to be fair. It's really like afterwards where it's completely cooked. I had like a headache like yesterday evening, like the entire evening, which was really funny because like yesterday was also like spring. Lantern Festival. So 2 weeks after, the Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year, you have like kind of like this festival where you put like lanterns, and it's kind of like the moment when spring is really starting. And oh my God, I couldn't like stay. I couldn't like stay like awake for the entire time. So I think I had like a small nap like just after eating because I was so sore. So it is what it is. Like I need to recover from that because I feel like the soreness of today, I think it will last until like the end of the week. It's so cooked. Okay, that's enough for me. We have never been playing Hightail, so thank you for coming for the game. And I'll see you next time for more yapping and more insanity. And you know what? Maybe next week it will be 2 yapping streams. Who knows? Because like it's fun. I love yapping, and I think I'm back into like the flow of like just talking forever without stopping. Nap by 1,000 needles. It turns out so true. Thanks for the yap and stream. Yeah, thank you for coming. Have a wonderful evening. Take care of yourself wherever you are. Have a nice end of day, whatever. I'll see you next week, and I love you. Miyapa is back and my chat is back. Okay, bye-bye, bye-bye.